Hi guys, I'm Björn.
And I'm Tasty Graph, and this is Two Geeks and One Book Club.
One book club, not one book. Several
No, not
books.
one book. It's a book club because we're going to have loads of books. So it's a good thing we did it twice because I said one book last time.
Last time? What do you mean? I have never heard of
Like
this last time.
that one time I was muted
You're still
and
muted.
Microlight says, "Okay, it's time to get some knowledge."
Yeah.
It is.
Pico Fighter got first, and Lolly
Yes.
NL is third. That's really good. Okay,
Yep.
so let's thirst some knowledge. Um,
Chapter 10 in my book, first edition.
and
What
second
chapter in
edition,
yours?
it is chapter 12.
Alrighty.
So two
My chapter is
chapters.
called Some Elements Are Game Mechanics.
Same here. It's actually a confusing title, in my opinion, especially if you look at the content, which we will go through in just a moment,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
Like, what some elements aren't game mechanics. You should then discuss that too. But
Maybe they do that later in the book. We just haven't gotten there.
what is the next? Oh, the next one is game mechanics must be in balance. Ooh, that's going to be an interesting chapter. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's look at what this is about. So today we only have one chapter, and that is because it's a very long chapter, and it even goes through some math and things. We won't go in depth into math, but we will try to cover like the major learnings of this chapter.
Yep.
So, should we get started? So, basically, what Jesse has done, he's taken game mechanics and he has divided into 7 different mechanics.
Yeah. He basically, well, in my book, it's only 6. So
There's
that's
only
going to be
6 in
interesting too.
yours? Oh,
Yep. So that's going to be interesting.
oh,
But before we kind of start to talk about these
only 7.
things, I think it's important maybe to try to think about why did the author choose to kind of talk about these mechanics and explain them? And I think it comes back to one of these things we had in one of the previous chapters about game designers need a language. Like we need to be speaking the same language. And I think this chapter overall does a pretty good job of giving us words that we can use to more I guess more accurately describe our own games when time comes to do that. So like when we have the first one called Mechanic 1, it's called Space. It brings up these concept of discrete or continuous space, which I think is really good. I mean that's a way of explaining areas in a game that I wasn't really I didn't have words for that previously. And that's how I felt about this whole chapter. Like it keeps giving you more words to use when you're talking about your game design.
Yeah, it's extending your vocabulary
Mm,
and the thing is that's the hard thing. Like we even discussed this a bit before the stream, and we can discuss it a bit more after we've gone through this chapter, which is like what does game mechanics even mean? And there's the what usually players call game mechanics, which is just it's basically almost every person has an own perception of what they think is a game mechanic. Nobody really knows, and that's because there's a lot of authors have tried to define what is a game mechanic, but they not all of them disagree. Don't get me wrong, but they have major differences in how they explain it and what they think is a main game mechanic. And thus, depending on what books you read, if you read any, your perception of when someone says game mechanic is going to be different. So it's actually something that I find that game studios actually should sit down and some do and define things like we're going to use whatever, for example, Jesse Shell uses. That's what he says the game mechanic is. That's what we're going
mm,
to use. And then what you said is going to happen is that there's going to be less confusion between people.
yeah. And also a lot of time saved. I mean, if everyone in the studio speaks the same game design language, then problems are going to be described easier and solutions are going to be found faster, and money will be saved. So
Exactly.
it's, I mean, I really feel very strongly about this because I also work in the teaching industry, and it's so important to be able for people, students, whatever, in a team to communicate using the same language to describe things. That's just gonna make things so much easier.
I've seen even where, for example, I've gone to a game jam, and then there's two people who are talking there, and then, ooh, kitty, scratch.
Yeah, I think she saw something on the wall.
She saw a book. Um, she's disagreeing with what we're saying. But if you go to game jams, I've seen many times where there's like two people talking, and then they are discussing some idea and they're disagreeing, and then they have this violent disagreement. But from outside standpoint, you see that they're actually discussing the same thing and excited about the same thing. But because of this miscommunication that happens, they might even turn to where they don't dislike each other fully and they walk different paths. And you're like, well, it can be very, very radical. The how well a team or how you react to even a person. Like even in gaming companies, you have had disagreements where then people can't work with each other anymore, and they can be just around some very, very small things that have been miscommunicated. So that's why it's very, very important to define things, even if it's a bit scientific and theoretical.
Yeah, and in case anyone's wondering, Bjorn and I are friends again after disagreement. It wasn't permanent.
No,
I
it
hope.
was from my side.
Oh, snap.
No. Okay, so we haven't had any disagreements. I'm trying to think. Maybe. Who knows?
I don't think so. I think we're both kind of, we there are a lot of things that we don't agree with each other on, but I think, I don't know, I mean, at least on my side, I respect the experience and the knowledge that you have. So usually when there is something that you don't agree with me on, basically just explain your point of view, and I'm like, it makes sense or it doesn't make sense to me, but it's your opinion, you're entitled to it.
Exactly. I think that's a richness. Like if you work in a team, um, different point of views are just gonna make your game stronger. You just have to agree on, like if it's something very concrete, which one you're gonna follow now, and then you can test it. And then that doesn't mean that the other person is wrong or anything. So it's about working with people, not trying to prove yourself right or impose yourself on people.
Hmm.
So that said, maybe we should start with the mechanic ones. We will at some point, I guess. I'll have one that you don't have. So just
Yeah.
give a shout out when it's like I'm on version 7 or something of the mechanic. Which
Yep.
7th is chance for me, so it's something before that. But the first one
Yeah,
is
because
space
6
for
is
both.
chance for me. Yeah, space is mechanic number 1 in this book.
Yeah, and this is very interesting. Like you said, it has the discrete and continuous space, which it discusses. And how to explain this simply? Do you want to give it a try?
Well, if we go, I mean, how to explain the difference between discrete and continuous simply?
Yeah.
Is that it? Okay, well, if you're talking about discrete places or discrete spaces in a game environment, you're basically talking about an area in which the position of the player doesn't matter. So a discrete space could be a field in Monopoly, like, you know, the square where the player lands. It doesn't matter if the player lands at the edge of the square. Either you're in or you're out. So a discrete space is, I would say, in a way, it's a binary. It's either in or out. You're either in the discrete space or you're not in the discrete space. Whereas if we're talking about continuous, that could be a football field or a soccer field for Americans. Um, that's a two-dimensional space. It could also be a three-dimensional space, but let's just call it three-dimensional space. You know, you're on the field, but your position inside the field matters if it's a football game. But then you could kind of extrapolate it, I guess it's called, or make it more
Yep.
abstract, and you could say each goal is technically a discrete space because either the ball is in or it's not. There's no like in between. As soon as the ball is inside and it's in the goal, then you've scored. So that would be a discrete space, which leads us on to some of the later stuff in this chapter. But yeah, the difference between discrete and continuous is that discrete is either in or out.
Exactly. And he uses, to explain this, he uses tic-tac-toe. Like, everybody's probably played tic-tac-toe. It's like a hashtag, and then you put either X or circle. So it doesn't matter where in the square you put the X. There you go. So where I put there in the square, it doesn't matter as long as it's within those boundaries. If it's confusing, like in the middle of a line, it would probably, a bit against the rules. But I mean, that's the idea. It doesn't matter where it is. Whereas if I was in a platformer game, that might matter a lot if I'm going to get hit by something or something's going to happen. So the exact positioning is more important. Here, like Tasty said, it's just, are we in or are we out? And he goes on then, and I think this is an interesting thing, which I think is a super useful tool. So, a continuous space can have, or you can build your own discrete spaces on top of them. And I'm not talking about necessarily nesting yet, which you have also like in Zelda, but more like, for example, for the purpose of building football strategy, for example, or building your game, and let's say you have to build an AI, you could take the whole football field, like you said, goal is a place, and then there might be an offensive position, a flanking position. There could be, and you could think more about where's the tactical general positions that either players are inside of that position or not. He uses that, for example, as an example, and I can show this time the picture. So here he's breaking apart the football field. So this is the football field right there, or soccer field, I guess. And then here is the kind of discrete. Was this American football or was this? Looks like soccer. Anyway.
I think it's soccer.
So here you have then the kind of the discrete where, this is the center, this is where you start the game, and here's like, okay, and that's the way you can simplify space, and that gives it more meaning for, like, if you have a continuous space, sometimes, for example, building strategy can be very hard because it's too much. It's kind of hard to know what is what, or, how to break it apart. But when you put it into discrete spaces, you're like, are you on the left side of your enemy's goal, or are you on the right side, or in the center? It's easier to discern things, and then you can start building things around that. And then that comes to the whole nested spaces, I guess. Or do you want to discuss that more?
No, I think it's fine to move on to the nested spaces, because I think, in a way, nested space is more about perception, really. I mean, like, a lot of the examples in the book are about how we discern between inside and outside. Like, if we're inside the house, then we have a continuous space of some sort there. We know that there's stuff on the other side of the door, or if we're on a map, then we know that going to that little town icon is going to lead to a nested space area that could be continuous. So it's kind of, I think nested space is kind of a way to talk about how to transition from continuous space, which could be the map, to something which on the map looks like a discrete space, but then once you enter this discrete space, it becomes a continuous space. And I guess that's why we use nested spaces, to kind of talk about the relationship between spaces within spaces. And hello, Lily. Welcome.
Welcome. Are more people joining? Don't know. Maybe. Not the discussion, except you guys. You're a part of it with the chat. So remember, guys, you can always post questions in the chat. We will try to answer most of them. You can also have your own discussion and your own opinion in the chat. and we'll try to also follow along that. So nested space also, I think, is a kind of a, it's, you can use it many ways. So you can use it to also save time, for example, like fast traveling or things like that. So when, because discrete spaces, right, is not about the exact positioning. That's why they usually lend themselves quite well to where, for example, you want to save time or other things that would happen in between. So,
Yes.
I'm trying to think, is there anything else that we haven't really thought about? But it's basically kind
Well,
of distracting. What? Sorry?
well,
Not
I
distracting.
just wanted to add that
Extracting.
basically nested spaces is a way to kind of make a simple representation of something which is larger. Like you have the map, and each icon leads to a space within a space. It's just a fancy way of saying spaces can be abstract but contain more stuff inside of it. So I think we should probably just
Yeah.
move on.
The zero dimensions is something he discusses, that the spaces can also be. He's been talking also about 2D and 3D spaces and what does that mean. A lot of like tic-tac-toe, he argues that is, I think, one-dimensional even if it does have from a discrete point of view, I think. But then he has
Mm,
zero-dimensional, like if you play a quiz game or something like that,
yeah,
where you either answer the question wrong or not. It doesn't really have a visual space. So remember, guys, I think it's actually quite smart. One thing I can bring up here, which is nothing to do with the zero dimensions, that this is which we forgot to say, that spaces doesn't have anything to do with necessarily how it visually looks. So it's not about like, actually what I use usually is environment, which is even more confusing then, and people start thinking about the visual aspect of it, and that's why spaces is better, because it's just it's a place that contains something, right? So in the zero dimensions, just to clarify that it's not, when we talk about spaces, we don't talk about like aesthetics or something like that. But zero dimensional is also interesting because I think it's relevant to understand how many dimensions there are, because it helps you maybe if you want to design something to break apart your continuous space. So the continuous space, again, being the one where, for example, in platform, the exact position of the character or something else or an object. But sometimes breaking that apart is easier, especially for programming. I think programmers use this a lot. So for
mm,
example, if you're making an AI for an enemy, instead of thinking what is the exact coordinate and relationship between the player and the enemy, you might just look at is the enemy behind you or in front of you. Sorry, is the player in front of you or behind you? And that makes it more discrete, because it's, again, not exactly. It's just saying, is it or not?
yeah. And I think that's also one of the reasons why the book starts out with this talk about the mechanic of space, because this is something that will help you better define your mechanics later on. Like you're mentioning now, is the player in front or behind or whatever, and the same thing goes for when like, let's say you're trying to describe a one-way platform in a platformer game. Then being able to use these words like that is going to make things a lot easier in terms of describing it. Being able to say the player is able to jump through a platform if the platform is above him, if it's in the space that is above him, so to speak.
Yeah.
Um,
So from the point of
of
view
course,
of
that was
that,
also possible without these words, but you know what I mean.
yeah, exactly. The thing is, like, from the point of
For
view of the enemy and the
yeah,
enemy logic, it is a discrete space, where even if it's happening in a continuous space.
yes,
Another
exactly.
example is in procedural generation, like Spelunky, or even my own game, where basically you could say that each tile that it places, so it's procedurally getting these pre-made puzzles, right, and it's placing them into the continuous space. But what choice of tiles, they're discrete. And for example, Spelunky, I think it's a, is it a 4x4 or a 3x3? I think it's a 4x4. Hardly difficult with the host. Welcome, guys.
Whoop, whoop.
God, 158 Hardleys. Welcome, guys. We're going through Jesse Schell's The Art of Game Design, and we're discussing or going through his definition of what is a game mechanic, and we're at mechanic 1. So you're joining us just at the right time, which is basically
The time where he needs to go on a break.
exactly the time where he needs to go and break, and we're discussing mechanic number 1, space. Space as
Yep.
not as outer space, but space as a place where
As a mechanic.
Exactly. Sup, Joe Fro? Hope Harley's stream went well. I heard that your asset you're not gonna continue working on that. That's because there's better ways to do it. So that's a pity. But it's also awesome that you found an alternative way of doing it. Of course.
Yeah, but then I think Hardly started working on something new after that.
Yeah.
Again.
Yeah, I haven't checked that out yet. What do you know what he's working on? Hardy's always working on something.
My muse will tell me in a moment when it pops into my mind, but
Hey,
I know that he's working on something new. But yeah, I'm sorry.
oh,
I can't
Bitcoin mining.
remember. Oh,
Yes.
that's the one.
Yeah, that.
Yeah.
I actually remember now that you said. That sounds really interesting.
Yeah.
Especially if you would make it into, like, I think you discussed it even how to make it into a game or something, or part of the game for monetization. I don't know the details. It sounds just really cool. I need to check that out, some guys. So if you guys haven't checked out Hardly Difficult before, go check him out. Click his name and click follow. I'm not able to stream anymore. It's clear. Last stream I was all over the place. Today all over the place. And hey, RRDPC and Sentient, I think maybe. Welcome to the company again, guys, and cheers for the follow.
Hardly Difficult says it's an app which runs while your computer is idle and mines using the CPU, and then it sends the profit to the streamer of your choice.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's sort of like an alternative to in-app purchases or ad revenue and stuff like that, where technically you're able to assist the streamer.
Inner space in my head where the brain should be, but it's clearly missing. Yeah, I have that feeling right now. I was out a bit having fun yesterday, so I'm still recovering. An alternative watching ads for bits. Ooh, hey, the King Penguin. Thank you for the bit. Okay, anyway, let's chat about the book. Yeah, so let's get started. Or continue where we left off. So we were talking about space and how space has continuous space and discrete spaces. Oh, kitty.
And we are at lens 21 in my book, the lens of functional space.
Exactly. Let's read that out. It's 26 in mine.
Okay. Lens number 21 or 26, the lens of functional space. To use this lens, think about the space in which your game really takes place when all surface elements are stripped away. So like when all the aesthetics are removed. Ask yourself these questions. Is the space of this game discrete or continuous? How many dimensions does it have? What are the boundaries of the space? Are there subspaces? And how are they connected? Is there more than one useful way to abstractly model the space of this game? I hope that was what was written in your book as well.
Yeah, it's the exact same. Yeah, I find this hugely helpful, especially to like help model your game. So once you've built you can do it in any place, but for example, for me, like once I've designed the game in a way that I have the core idea in place, this helps me build it further and create depth, because once I start looking at it from point of view of spaces, like should I have a world map where I can go fast travel, or should I for example in procedural generation, how are these spaces connected? Like, oh, I put a space with a key, there should be probably a space with a door that needs to unlock. And that again, once you start understanding these more complex spaces and more complex connections, it's going to help you create a better game, and you're also going to understand more about how games are built. So this is definitely something that I highly recommend. When you play games, take a look at the game and try to look at it. Is it a continuous space or a discrete space? Or
Yeah.
and what are the like all of these this thing this lens is saying, because it's going to help you break apart, and then once you break it apart, you're going to understand better why did the designer do a certain choice.
There's actually something that I think is interesting about this lens because we can take an example game, which game?
Yep.
When you were working on the shop, in the beginning, I think your thought was to have it as a continuous space on the map where the player goes to it and it's basically part of a map as such. But now you've changed it so that when you're in the game mode, the shop it's a discrete space where you can see the door to the shop, but once you go there, you switch to continuous space and you're in there. And that's kind of where I feel like the last question of the lens of functional space is useful. Like, is there more than one useful way to abstractly model the space of this game? Where you had it in one way to begin with, and you kind of thought, okay, this might be a bit too problematic, and I want to change it to make the shopping experience more calm without enemies or something like that. So I think that's what this lens also helps you do when you're looking at your game. It's like, can I take this continuous space, this experience, and shove it into a different corner of my map or my world or my game without ruining things or changing the experience too much?
Yeah, I would say that RPGs and that type of games, right, use this uh, the most. They have the most nested spaces. Usually, they have the most abstract spaces and like things that connect, like where they layer. Some games layer like continuous and discrete spaces a lot, and there's a lot of really good examples, like Final Fantasy. You kind of go from like a free movement world map kind of thing. Then you enter a town, and then when you're in a town, you might have a fight with somebody or something. You can also outside of the map have a fight. And when you enter the fight mode or the combat mode in Final Fantasy, you're basically in a discrete space because you do have a
Mm-hmm.
visual representation of position, but either the characters in their position or then they're attacking. And
Yeah.
what order of the positions, I don't they mostly don't matter, if I remember correctly. Maybe in some things they did, but I can't remember all the mechanics.
Maybe not in Final Fantasy, but in some strategy games, yeah, it's common to have like the front row matters in a way, whereas the back row, like those discrete spaces could give a bonus to attack or something. But yeah, I'm not sure it does in Final Fantasy.
Yeah, I can't remember. If there's some Final Fantasy buff out there, you can give us a shout out, and if there is anything. But I can't remember it. I think you can just click and choose whoever you attack. So it could be represented in any way you want. Hey, Nash fan, FL13, welcome to the company Game Devs, and cheers for the follow.
Lilybite says her MMORPG's map is broken up in strange ways. There's a 2D X and Y map, and entering those 2D tiles opens up to a 3D space. But those 3D spaces can be linked to other spaces under other 2D tiles. So yeah, well, it's a 2D world map, and then in a way you could say that that is not a continuous space because each of the tiles in your 2D world map is essentially a discrete space because you're either in this XY position or you're not. But that really, in a way, whether it's discrete or continuous, that also depends on whether or not there's game objects interacting on these areas. Like, does it matter if you're in or out? And again, it's not so much about aesthetics, it's more about what relevance does the definition have on the rules that you'll be writing for your game later, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it definitely does. I would say that that the space is definitely something that is good to start thinking about quite early, but it's maybe not the first thing, except if you're making a strategy game. So
Yeah.
um, it definitely is something like thinking about it too late. Usually, like some of these things and some things when you design, everything has an order. So there's no point in thinking about certain aspects of your game too early because they don't really matter and they'll change so much. But for example, space is something you definitely need to lock in place, and then you are in trouble when and if, for example, you get spaces wrong. Like let's say you have a huge open world thing, and you have no way to fast travel, and then you realize, oh, maybe I should have created a space like a world map where you can click just the town and teleport. This is a very simple example. Adding that very late on is gonna probably create, like, it might even break the game suddenly because it's still gonna have repercussions down the chain. So this is a very,
Mm.
very big thing that's gonna have repercussions on most of your gameplay. So if you change the space, if you change the space, you add spaces, it's all gonna have rippled effects throughout your game.
Yeah, and also it's kind of like it in a way the functional space is linked to the aesthetics. It doesn't necessarily mean that you can look at the aesthetics of a game and automatically assume or know whether it's a discrete or a continuous space. And a good example of that is like Lillybite is mentioning a travelable map, kind of like the Mario games did it. Because the Mario game maps are basically discrete points. Like there's there's no middle way. Either you're at this point in the map, or you took the path and you're over here at this point in the map. There's no, even though there's visible space because it's overlaid on top of an image, it's still a discrete space because you have like spot one here, and then linearly there's a line to spot two. There might be a way to go to spot three here or spot four here, but it's all discrete places on a map, even though it's overlaid on top of like an image, and the aesthetics have changed.
Yeah, and that's the whole, like, I actually find that the most interesting um, way to look at something is when you forget about space as a projection of position and just think it about, like, let's say like the example we used, like in soccer, like are you in a well, it's still a position, but are you in a defensive position, are you in an offensive position, or and how are they laid out and how are they connected, like can you get to
Mm.
an offensive position uh, without going like can you get from a defensive position to an offensive position in one move, or like are they connected? No, there's a middle ground there, and that all matters. What if you remove that? What if you all have to go through a certain point to get there? It all affects, and it also helps you thinking about and breaking apart your game in a way that you can handle it easier to build, definitely, especially strategy and things like that. But then after space, the second mechanic. Let's see if we have the same one still. So the second mechanic
Yeah,
is defined here in my book is time.
that is different for me. In my book, it's called objects, attributes, and states.
Yeah, that's mechanic 3. So time is the new one he's added then in the second edition, which is very interesting.
We don't know that yet.
Oh, you don't know
Maybe
it's in.
number time. It's not. Time is the Joker.
Yeah,
So,
I
do you
spent, I
want
like
to
to
do
say,
time first?
yeah, let's do time, and I
Yeah.
guess I now have to explain it well enough for you to understand too. But you said soccer. You're from Finland. Just kidding. Yeah. I mean, I try to use soccer because that I know everybody will understand correct way wherever you are in the world. Versus me saying football, and then everybody has a totally different. It's about, again, about communication, right? I do call it football here. So next one is time in the second edition, and time it's interesting. I found it really interesting because again, he takes time and he breaks it apart into discrete time and continuous time. So let's say discrete time could be something like you have a turn. It doesn't really like. Let's say we are playing some kind of game with Tasty, and then we have a turn. So first I go, then he goes, and then I go, and then he goes. It's still a representation of time, but it isn't really real time, right? And that's also just like the space. You can use it the same way to break apart things. Like then you have things like where you use limit, like a combination kind of a both. Like you have in like playing competitive chess, you have a certain limit time to make your move, but then you have to, which is your turn. So you limit the amount of time you have to take your turn, which then has continuous time, which is the 15 seconds that you have to choose your move. Then your turn ends, which is the discrete time, and then you might even have a match time that the match only can take 1 hour. So those are 3 different times, so, which you can start breaking apart in your game. You could even say that the Mario, he argues that you could say that the Mario jump, for example, how long that takes, because that matters, is a time too, which, again, something that would like hugely change the game. For example, in the original Donkey Kong, like when you're jumping over those barrels. I can't
Yeah,
open
because
that.
the Donkey Kong jump was kind of linear.
Exactly. It was very linear. So it would majorly change the game if the timing was different. And then you even have games that control time, where you play around the time as the mechanic itself, like Braid, where you can go back in time, go forward in time. So that is Lens.
Hello, Wobbly.
Yep. Hello, Wobbly, and welcome. Sorry, the overlay is not on at this part of the stream. I might incorporate it somehow, have like a book club version of it.
It's the picture he's linking is like a cool image of, I think it might be a key. It could also be a piece of candy or a lollipop, but it is drawn in the Windy Beard style.
Ooh.
Except for the line art. The line art has not been. It's black, where in the Windy Beard style, it usually takes on the color that it's next to.
It's a baby rattle, dude. It's a baby rattle.
Oh.
How can you not see it?
It's a baby rattle. Well, it looks awesome.
So that is the second mechanic, the lens of time. It is said that timing is everything. Our goal as designers is to create experiences, and experiences are easily spoiled when they are too short or too long, too fast or too slow. Ask these questions to make yours just the right length. What is it that determines the length of my gameplay activities? Are my players frustrated because the game ends too early? How can I change that? Are my players bored because the game goes on too long? How can I change that? Would clocks or races make my gameplay more exciting? Time limits can irritate players. Would I be better off without time limits? I think that is a spelling mistake. I'm not sure. That's the first one I've noticed. Would a hierarchy of time structures help my game? That is, several short rounds that together comprise a larger round. Timing can be very difficult to get right, but it can make or break a game. Often it makes sense to follow the old vaudevillian adage. I don't know what that means. Leave him wanting more. It's the adage. What is an adage? It's not a homage, so it's something else. Adage.
I don't know.
Adage.
I don't know what vaudevillian means either. I just know the word.
Vaudevillian.
I know the word from V for Vendetta. When he says that whole line of stuff, like he says vaudevillian at some point, but I don't know what it means.
I don't know.
Maybe someone can help us out.
All our credibility went out the window now because we don't know what vaudevillian adage means. Sup, Flippo? Welcome.
Hello, Flippo.
So.
Spectrum is helping us. He says, adage. It's a short statement expressing a general truth. Is it called an adage, maybe?
Adage? I don't know. Adage?
Yeah.
Quidditch? I don't know.
The old adage, the old adage, out of sight, out of mind. So it basically means a saying or a proverb or a Danish ordspråk.
Truism, by word. Yeah. Anyway, it's a fancy way to say something. Anyway. um, but yeah, I like the. It's very short. It was only like one and a half page, so there's not
Yeah,
really
but
much to add.
you mentioned three types of time. You said discrete time, continuous time,
Yeah.
and match time.
Well, there's the discrete and continuous time, meaning discrete meaning turns and stuff like that, and continuous being moving forward. But under that,
Yeah.
not really different types of time, but then you have like ways to implement like clocks and races, like um, you know, you have a race with a car, and that has how long it took, who can finish it fastest, or you could
Okay.
have the whole how long does it take a jump to take, or to jump, and how long does it take for the barrel to pass and stuff like that, and what else?
So basically, you could say that discrete is like it's an abstract time, a form of time. So discrete could be you have 3 attempts at doing this, and that is technically a discrete time measure because you can do something 3 times before you can no longer do it,
Yeah, that's
as
actually true.
opposed to saying, this is a continuous time, you have 15 seconds to do it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean that's actually he doesn't use that, but I do think that definitely fits into the whole time thing. Also, shortly mentioned civilization, where you can force basically each turn is a year, but then actually what a turn is changes because suddenly it's not 1 year, it's like 10 years and goes forward faster.
Mm.
If you've played the
Yeah, so
game.
that it's an
No,
abstract.
wait, it's the other way around. It starts with going many years at a time, and then it goes to 1 year, which is again
Yeah.
adjusting pacing. So basically, the thing is, I would say the takeaway from this is like think about how do you represent time, just like how do you represent space, and adjust how you do it by is it a discrete time or a continuous time. So if I'm in a continuous time, I have to play through every second. Whereas, you could say discrete time kind of jumps time, usually, or simplifies it into a kind of a discrete thing. So, for example, you could say that if you go and play a game and then you defeat the final boss, and then to get back, you can jump time. You don't have to walk the whole thing away. You just are suddenly back or something like that.
Oh
Could be a
yeah,
way.
the nice shortcut.
Yeah,
We like that.
you could say that that is one. It's not very strong one, but I mean that's another example. So thinking about
Mm.
time and like, do you have to go through every second? And also, I think the other aspect is pacing. So again, why would you skip the whole walking back? It's because of pacing. It's very boring. There's not really much to do. So you can adjust the pacing. You can also even out like why strategy games, some of them use turn-based movement. Turn-based, like in the old Baldur's Gate, was to kind of easier balance things instead of having it like modern strategy games where everything happens at once in real time.
Mm.
This becomes a much slower game pace of game, but it also gives you time to strategize and make your moves like in chess, right?
Yep.
Real-time chess would be weird. I wonder if you're only moving weird patterns, but everybody's moving pieces at the same time, and you're trying to capture the king.
First person chess.
First person chess. I think somebody's made something like that. But anyway,
Probably. In a way, first person chess is team based shooter games.
kind of,
In a
yeah.
way. Because, both sides have teams of equal sizes usually. Usually they're not balanced though, in the sense that both sides have one of each of this specific type of character. Spectrum says siege games, stronghold. Yeah, I mean that is in a sense It's a form of, well, but the thing is though, if you look at chess, chess is really a game that looks at the real world, looks at the situation of trying to capture the other team's king, which by the way is something I just learned today. I thought chess was about killing the other king, but you correct me if I'm wrong. You're not allowed to kill the other king?
Well, kind of not in a way.
You're not. I
Well,
mean,
kind of. In the end of the
basically
game,
on
you
what
do kind of
I
kill
read.
him. You basically, it's about capturing him. Yeah. Well,
Exactly. I
you
mean,
do
that's the
also.
point. You have to put him in a situation where he cannot, and that is why you must warn him by saying check so that he knows that he has to move.
Yeah.
And I guess in a way, you're he is not allowed to move his king into a position where he dies.
Yeah. Or
So
gets
so
captured.
you're not allowed to kill the king, which I mean that
Well, the
I
whole
only
thing.
just learned that today.
Well, the whole in chess, it's also important that even when you never kill anything, actually in the whole game, you always capture. Meaning that if I get one of my, what are they called, the
Pawns?
plebs, the pawns. If I get one of them through the whole map, I can then I can basically help escape one of the previous captured pieces.
Yeah.
So there, in a way, you could say you don't kill anything in chess, which is you only capture things.
But but 7-year-old
Captive.
Tastygraph thought that chess was about killing
Yeah,
stuff.
exactly.
Um, I
But
mean, I
I,
have played chess since then, but only recently realized that there are a lot of rules there, and I kind of like the idea that you politely remind your opponent that you've just checked his king, checkmated him.
yeah. So I think we're gonna discuss this more in the future. But yeah, I do think that which he does say in this book is like he explained this whole thing, and I think that's because chess abstracts too much, and I think there
Mm,
even today's like people have stopped playing as much chess as they used to, and I think it's because partially because it's just too abstract. People don't know what the main goal is, and the main goal, if you just look at them play, looks boring. Just kill a guy. I mean, no. But then when it comes to chase and kind of a chase and the capture, it sounds more intriguing, and
yeah.
you might be more interested in it.
Can you hear the plane outside?
No,
Oh, good. Good, good. It was
like
really loud. It was like I could barely hear you. I was kind of thinking, are you going to fly away soon? What? But it's gone now.
no, planes don't fly. It's in a
Oh.
discrete space of either bothering you or not.
Can you please exit the discrete place of bothering me?
That's don't use that with your wives, your or husbands. I think they will
Yeah.
be very displeased. Hi,
Don't use game design link on your spouses. It's
or
not a good
anybody.
idea. Yeah,
Hey,
or anybody.
hey, Breezinger, welcome to the company of Game Devs. Also, Ronald Rowe, welcome both. And cheers for the follows.
Lily Bite says, one of my favorite games as a kid was Battle Chess. The chessboard was all animated and would kill other pieces. I used to love that game. And
Yeah,
that was actually the first time I played a chess game on the computer that I liked to play. Because I remember, I had normal chess games on the Commodore 64. But I remember at some point when we had, I think it was on the PC, we got the battle chess game, and I was like, I want to play that game where it's chess, but they fight. And it was like, it was just regular chess, except that the units were animated.
yeah. There was I wish I would remember this like properly what their arguments were, but in uni actually they broke apart battle chess and why it revived chess and why it became so popular, even if chess wasn't as popular even back then.
Hmm.
I can't remember their arguments though. I just remember them using it. I never played it myself.
It's kind of, I guess it's because it it visualizes what the game was supposed to put in your mind, so to speak. Like, when you're moving the rook or the tower, it it's just like a piece that you're pushing on the board, but in your imagination you should be thinking that, there's like a really strong warrior guy or whatever. In Danish it's called the tower, but I guess in English it's really more like a strong guy, I guess. I don't know. What is a rook? What does rook mean in English? I just know that's the name of the piece. Let us Google it.
Google time with Tasty.
Yeah.
This is game design book club is over. This is Google time. No, it's good. Google tells us the truth. No, wait, it doesn't. It's did you find it? No.
it's too complex.
Oh,
basically it's a bird, and yeah, I'm not even gonna go into that.
Okay. People in chat will tell us the truth, because that's they know. We don't have time to read it, but chat does.
Yeah, Lilybite says castling is where two people once the king and rook. Castling is when the king switches place with the rook, and the rook was at some point called the castle. And I think that's why they call it castling.
Yeah, it has a lot of weird. It's kind of interesting. Like, did that appear as a house rule, or was that just like was that part of the game like initially, or was that a house rule that was then became a set rule? Because it feels very weird that you're able to do things like that.
Yeah.
Chariot. Yeah. Then again,
yeah, I think chess is originally a game from, I don't know, like really old times, Sanskrit or something, and it was called Chaturanga, it says here. Yeah.
Chaturanga.
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 Let me post it in chat here. Rook. The Persian word rook means chariot.
I think it's because you're putting the king in defensive position hidden behind the rook. Allah put him in the castle to protect him away from the front line. Yeah, that could be. It could be. I mean, it's an interesting move. Is that, I think, the only kind of special move that's in the whole game. I don't remember any other like speciality rules.
That's a good question.
It's very. I think it feels kind of it definitely changed the strategy of the game, but at the same time it feels very odd. There's one special that type of rule. Everything else is just movement and things like that. But this is like, oh, if this special circumstance happens, you can get to switch these to.
In a way, you could say that there are special rules with the pawn as well, because it moves forward, but it attacks diagonally.
Yeah, that's
which in a way is kind of a special move, because it's like it's not, it's always moving forward, but if there's an enemy diagonally in front of it, it can then attack.
There is a French move with pawns that can only occur in the middle of the board, I think. Oh, but is that a speciality rule? Like, it doesn't play normally? Yeah. This comes to one of my to one of my favorite subjects. I'm not saying this is this is more a general rule, not something that you can't break, but in general, it's better to have as little exceptions in your game as possible. So especially if you're making a board game where you can't, when you're making a board game, the players have to read the rule or learn from another player. So they have to memorize most of the rules. They are the system. The players are the system in many ways. They interact with the boards or the pieces and make the things happen, right? Most of the time. There is, of course, games that use gravity and other things to do things, but in general, again, meaning that less exceptions is easier to understand, where it's not like, oh, it's like this, but if this happens like this, and if it's this character, then this happens actually, and then you have to remember all exceptions. So that's actually to make a more user-friendly board game or even digital game. Think about what are your exceptions, and becoming a lens, the lens of Bjorn. Think about your exceptions. Think, are they necessary? So again, that also helps you in digital games to kind of think like, even this chapter discusses that if you make a simpler game with just a lot of ways to use those simple mechanics, usually it tends to add more emergent gameplay, so more interesting scenarios can happen with just one little thing, and you can make sure that happens as a game designer. I think also thinking that removing exceptions makes it simple in that way. Like you could have emergent gameplay kind of without that, but sometimes there are so many exceptions, so many different rule sets that it's hard to see those possibilities, and then the emergent gameplay vanishes. Most simple games that have a lot of emergent gameplay have very little exceptions, and they have very many, like a lot of different ways to utilize an object or a thing in a game or a mechanic. Ooh.
New Noise Works says chess came before software versioning, so it's kind of hard to keep a consistent rule set across centuries. Yep.
Doesn't have version control.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can't watch this whole video, but for the people who looked at it.
Yeah, I posted a GIF as well. GIF. Basically, it means the en passant move means that if the peasant uses his initial two-step forward move, then if there is an enemy adjacent to him, then he can kill that enemy.
Oh, well, that is a specialty rule. Hey,
Yeah.
New Noise Works. Welcome to the company Game Dubs. Cheers for the follow. En passant.
So we're done with mechanic of time.
Yeah. I hope you understood
moved on
it.
to. Yeah, I did. I understood it. It's kind of weird that he didn't have it in first edition, but as with everything, there are iterations. It's interesting how third edition of this book is going to.
Yeah, it's like 60 things.
Yeah, Lilybite says they should have called it the stabby in the back move.
Stabby in the back.
Yes. Instead, they went with a fancy French word.
Or they could call it the rogue move or rouge move. No, wait, rouge is something else.
Rouge. Rouge is the color of our shirts.
It is. We are rouges. You will stab you in the... Oh, wait, no.
I'm a high-level rouge.
You see that misspelling so many times that I just like it when people do it. I am a rouge. I'm like, what?
Droid beer tank looking for group. That makes me want to punch people when they're like, it's called a druid and it's a bear, not a beer.
No, I am a beer. I love beer.
You are a beer. Bjorn.
I'm
mechanic number.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, yeah. So the mechanic number 3 for me and mechanic number 2 for you.
Exactly, and it's called objects, attributes, and states. And this one, in many ways, is the meat and bone, because, like they say, a space without anything in it is just space. So you're going to need to have some objects.
The final frontier. Sorry.
Yes.
I'm like. Okay. Go ahead.
These objects can be characters or props or tokens or, well, they could even be scoreboards. So basically what we're talking about here is there is something in your game. It has some kind of attribute, and this attribute could be speed or whatever, you know. It could be maximum speed, or it could be health, or it could be color even. So the attributes are kind of like the things that describe an object, and then finally you have states, which describes an attribute in a way. At least that's how I understood it, and then I think that's how it is basically. So you've got objects. Objects have attributes that describe the object, and the attributes have states that describe the condition or the state of the attribute.
Yeah, I understand.
Like in chess.
So I really like he made this diagram of Pac-Man. I think you have the same. I can show it right now.
Yep. Yep.
Tasty will see it in 6 months, but yes.
Or 10 seconds. I see it
6
now.
months.
Now I see it.
This is a discrete time.
First, I am being shown the lens because Bjorn is as good as at
there we
left
go.
and right
I'm trying
as
to get
I
it.
am.
I'm trying to get it sharp. It's still blinking a bit, but now it's better.
I can kind of read it.
So
now it's good.
Yeah, so in cage is where you start. Like, I think this is for the enemy, right? So for the ghost. Whoop, now it went blurry again.
But what we're looking at right now is how does the ghost act? So it has an attribute which we could call movement. If we look at the thing here, I don't know. Should I put it up and you can read? Then I can't read it myself, and I can't remember. So let's not do that. That was a really bad idea. It starts out with in cage. So basically, if the ghost is here in the cage, then there's a transition where it says time to leave cage. If that transition is fulfilled, if it's been in the cage for enough time to make it leave it, then it will enter the chasing Pac-Man stage. And then there's a transition where if Pac-Man eats a power pellet, then the ghost will need to turn blue and flee. So that will be its current state. And then there are two options from there on. There's eaten by Pac-Man, or the power pellet timer is almost up. And if it's almost up, then it's still fleeing, but there's a new transition state for it, where it could either have the power pellet timer is up and the ghost is then back to chasing, or it gets eaten by Pac-Man, and if it gets eaten by Pac-Man, then it goes back to the cage. So you could say that all of these boxes here, circles, they are different states. And they are different states of the ghost's movement attributes. So you would say that there's an object which is a ghost, and one of his attributes is movement mode. And then in movement mode, you have a state called in cage. You have a state called chasing Pac-Man, fleeing Pac-Man when it's blue, and flashing but still fleeing. And then it's turned into eyes and it's rolling back to the cage. So this is basically a way to describe your objects and later on describe what kind of rules are you using for your objects. Yeah? Do you want me to go on?
Yeah, you can. I can just say Sejadis. Welcome to the company of Game Devs, and cheers to the follow.
For a moment when you said Sejadis, I was like, are you talking Swedish?
Yes, I am.
Because it sounds like saying this.
Yeah, say this.
Säga. Säga.
Säga. Vad säger du?
Exactly. What are you saying?
So actually, Lilybite, I want to comment. Every game in the world is the set of if then else. Exactly, and actually that is what he named this next lens that's coming up, which is the lens of the state machine. Right? You have that? You look confused.
I'm looking the lens of dynamic state.
Oh, you have that?
Oh. Yeah.
Dynamic
lens
state.
Number 22.
He calls it the lens of state machine in my version.
Okay. Well, he calls it the lens of dynamic state. But a state machine is a dynamic state because it's basically a state that changes depending on what it needs to be. So it's a state machine.
So I guess he didn't like the dynamic state. No, he actually changed it because I can't pronounce it.
I think he changed it to state machine because probably by the time that book was written, state machine was like a buzzword in game design and AI pro. Maybe. I think that would be my guess.
State machines have existed for a long time, but I don't know. Yeah, I guess.
Yeah.
So should we read how should we do this though then? Because mine it basically describes Pac-Man and then instantly he introduces the state machine.
Oh, mine actually has 2 pages before getting to that where he talks about specifically talking about secret states on
Oh,
these objects, which is basically
interesting.
he's talking about what sort of information is available to who in the game. So,
Interesting.
you know, you
Actually, he
have
has that too, but he introduces the lens in my version first, then he goes to secrets, and then he introduces the lens of secrets.
oh, okay. Well, I don't have a lens of secrets.
Yeah, so that's why he changed it. He added the lens of secrets.
Good
Let me
call.
read my lens of
You do
state
the
machine,
dancing.
and then you can maybe should you read yours? No, you should. Then we should go through secrets. Then you can read yours, and I can read the lens of secrets. This becomes a bit confusing for the viewers, but it's interesting to see how he, you know, upgraded the book.
Yeah.
So
Well, I
after
think it's better if you do yours, and then when we're done with those two, we can go to lens of.
okay,
I hope.
so I hope to. So the lens of state machine. So it's lens number 28 in the second edition. It doesn't exist in this form in the first edition. It's combined with the lens of secrets. And the lens states following. So, the lens of the state machine. To use this lens, think about what information changes during your game. Ask yourself these questions. What are the objects in my game? What are the attributes of the objects? What are the possible states for each attribute? What triggers the state changes for each attribute? Game playing is decision making. Decisions are made based on information. Deciding the different attributes, their states, and what changes them is core to the mechanics of your game. And that is the whole lens. Hey Nagha, welcome to the Cuphead Game Devs, and cheers for the follow. Does that make sense? Is it similar to yours?
Yeah. Yeah, it was pretty much similar to mine.
Yeah, but it doesn't mention secrets because secrets comes as a separate lens in just a moment. But we can go and discuss secrets. So he basically, the secrets part, which is almost like I find like this whole secrets. He didn't make it its own lens, but it's almost the way he has being kind of breaking apart a game mechanic. I would think that this is as big as time even, or like the position. He goes
Yeah.
very deep into secrets, and the idea of secrets is that who knows about what. So, for example, if you make a strategy game like StarCraft 2 might be a modern example, you have a fog of war. Until you've gone somewhere, you don't know what is there. You don't know the terrain, except if you know the map already. So that is something, as a player, you don't know. The system, of course, knows everything. He knows where you are, where your enemy is, where everything is, and it's what keeps track of it in a digital game. In a board game, usually it could be a game master or something else. Now, if I don't have a unit there, I can't see what the other player's doing. So it's hiding the information. So thinking about these type of things can make your game much more deep, much more secretive. You can use secrets to pit players against each other or make them allies to gain that information. So it's in a way the secrets chapter or this secrets thing is like thinking about your game in a way that what information is available to what player and how can they utilize it, because again, information is power, and these type of secrets kind of block that. So for example, he uses the example of poker, right? You know your own hand, but you don't know the other player's hand. Your job is to find out what he has, and also not show what you have in any way while you're playing. So trying to hide your hand. That's the core mechanics of poker almost. Blackjack, again, you don't know the deck, but you can count the cards. What other
Yeah, that's
examples?
very much about like being able to determine the probability. We'll get into that later because that's a mechanic on its own. Chance.
Exactly, yeah. And I find this hugely. I don't know. Actually, Tasty, have you played a game called Werewolf or
Yeah,
Mafia? So
yeah,
Werewolf is a very interesting
yeah,
game. It's a social game where you start the game and you usually want to have like even 12 players. And you sit in a circle. Each player gets a role at the beginning of the game, and it has three phases, three turns. So it's a discrete time they use there. And there's villagers and there's werewolves. So some of the people are werewolves, but you don't know who. And the whole game goes through where there's a night phase and a day phase, and the villagers, every round a villager basically is marked to get killed, and then the villagers trying to, and the villagers will try to burn one guy or a person for being a werewolf. So every turn, basically one like the bad guys get to take one out, and in the daylight the villagers get to take one out, and they're trying to guess who is the werewolf, and then either the werewolves win when they have majority or the villagers. And it's a super interesting game because it can even it becomes even where the meta game is so real that people kind of attach real life to it, which I find interesting. So, and that's definitely a game of secrets.
Oh yeah.
So
and it's a game that also has a specific set of rules where I don't know exactly if it's like that in the werewolf game, but in the similar styles of games, sometimes information is not just within each player's realm or sphere. Sometimes two players can actually know the same type of information, because it could be like, all the ninjas open their eyes, and then all the ninjas open and they see each other and they can acknowledge each other as having the same role. So it's a game where there's a lot of information sharing and a lot of information hiding, and there's also a lot of deception. So it's very, like you said, very much a social.
Yeah, and that's what he discusses here. So he defines it that there is, what is that, 5 different types of information. So you have the type of information that is completely public, such as the position playing pieces on a game board or a facing up card. All players are aware of it. Yeah, HUD design sucks. I kind of like it, but I also dislike it. Depends on when I'm working on something that's very unique. HUD design is not great. Then we have, so that was A, so public information. B is the state that is shared between players 2 and 3. So it's something shared with two players, but not something. Exactly. There's an image that accompanies these. So that was B to the second one. Can you get it? Very hard.
I can't see my own screen there.
It's too blurry.
Yeah, it's too blurry. Let's see if it...
No, that's better. You can maybe see it if you go full screen. You have to buy the book to see the HD, so you can buy the book just below the stream. You just click the Amazon list thing.
I think the most important part about this image is that you have spheres that kind of determine some sort of information, and that's essentially it.
It's a Venn diagram of who knows what. So the B is the state of shared between 2 players. So you can have information that only shared with two players, but not one. Like in the werewolf game again, there's werewolves know who each other are, but the villagers don't know. They think everybody's a villager. So the werewolves know who's a villager and who's not, who is a werewolf or a ninja. And there's much more complicated. You're a ninja.
Ninja.
Oh, and actually, then there is in that game you also have the god figure, or the game master who knows everything also.
But actually the god is above the game master, because it says, in this case it's the randomly generated information. So
yeah, of course, yeah.
It's like only the extraterrestrial superpowers know the outcome of the roll of a dice. Not even the game master, the dungeon master, doesn't even know the result of a random roll of dice before it's rolled.
Then he is God. He changes the fate, which some game masters do.
Well, that's when they roll the dice behind the screen. Then it's okay. If they roll the dice in front of the players and then change it, that's kind of low.
No, they never do that. That's not something you do. But behind the screen you can. But you're not supposed to. But you can. That's why the screen is there.
I actually think you are. I mean, in a way you are supposed to, because if in the end the role of the dungeon master is to make an entertaining game for players, and if they've been super unlucky and the next die roll is going to end the entire adventure for all of them, then sometimes it's okay to believe. But then you could say, why did he make it possible for the entire adventure to end on the basis of one die roll?
Well,
Maybe it was just a bad dungeon master that
I
changed
think
his
the
ways.
idea is you're not supposed to, and it's kind of that's the whole idea. And the
Mm,
players should always feel like that. That the master never shifts die rolls, even if they do.
yeah.
It's the power. That's the skill. It's a poker face thing. It's a poker thing where you need to give them the idea that you are actually rolling dice for every little single decision, and
Mm,
they are not in control of their fates, and in a way, or they are in control, but like the dungeon master is not trying to make it easier or something, because then it basically, if they think that they can never die because the dungeon master is too kind, then it ruins the game. So you're not supposed to, but it's kind of, you from depends on which, again, that's if you're mainly a player, and no dungeon master ever will say, a good dungeon master will say, oh yes, you never cheat on die roll, you're not supposed to do that, and then they will do it without anybody in the world knowing, and
mm,
that's the skill. But from the point of view of the
yeah.
players,
Lily Bite says, Darkest Dungeons is all about kicking players in the nuts with dice rolls.
yeah,
And
well,
the Nash fan agrees.
it really is important to have that illusion of death, even if the dungeon master would, like, they need to let also players die, but not maybe the whole
Yeah.
team. Hey Snowmine, welcome to the company of Game Devs, and cheers for the follow. Anyway, getting back to the information. So yeah, so you have information that's shared just between two players. So we have information shared by everybody. Everybody knows it's the face up facing card. You have information only shared by two players. So let's say you take a deck, like two players get to look at a card, but not the other players. Like they share that information. Or actually a good example is like sometimes there's games where like Tasty has a hand and I get to pick one card from his hand and put it into my hand. Then he knows the card I picked and I know, but nobody else. In Love Letter, for example, a great card game,
Mm,
they use that mechanic a lot. And that, of course, can, again, these are so cool because once you have secret information, people get suspicious, and that starts whole plot of intrigue. Then we have C, is the information private to a single player, in this case, player 2. It could be cards he was dealt, for example. Yeah, so that's something you only know, nobody else. Oh, kitty! Kitty. Other kitty! It's not the same kitty!
yeah.
Kitties are
It's
there!
there
Infinite
are
kitties.
three kitties.
He
Oh, she
disagrees.
left.
So then D is information that the game knows about, but not the players themselves. There are some mechanical board games where this is kind of state exits in the physical structure of board game, but is unknown to the players. Well, it could also be like shuffle. If I just take a deck of cards, I can shuffle it. You know what is here, but you don't know what the order is. So the order is something the game in itself implicitly only knows by the order of the deck, even if it's not a thinking thing. It has an order, and then Braveheart Cat.
Yeah, she is a brave hard cat. Like
Freedom.
half orange and half black in the face.
You should take a photo and Photoshop it so it's blue and post it. Just put
Yeah. Or
freedom.
just put her face on Mel Gibson's.
That would be also hilarious.
Yeah.
Oh,
You know what? There are probably people who have already done that, like brave hard face animals.
now we're googling that. Anyway, so
I am.
information D is something that only the game or the game master or dungeon master knows. So, or the computer. This is something that's very like in computer games. Basically, the computer game in itself does know everything, but except the random. Well, actually, the computer knows also the results of every random dice roll, which is interesting. There is
Yep.
no fate in digital games, really. Um, so there's no E. You could argue for that if you wanted to, but the idea is that there would be then a E, which is fate, which is like when you put randomness in a thing, which nobody can know, uh, only the computers. No, Um,
But in a way, like the game is different from the computer because yes, the computer knows the result of a random roll before it's actually run in a way, but the game does not necessarily know that because that's not within the scope of its knowledge or rules, even though it runs on the computer, which is like,
well, the
you
game
could
can
take it,
know because you use a
it
seed and
can,
you.
but it doesn't always.
No. You don't
You know what I
program
mean?
it so it would know. No.
Exactly. That
Like
was
that would
my
be
point.
or you
Because
can, but it's a crappy game, and that's very
yeah,
important. Like he even has this example of a grandfather not trusting the chess game of like
exactly.
when they first came out because the people who programmed it could have made the enemies know exactly your hand because it's still that's the only thing. Like if you have a virtual enemy, basically I as a program could make that enemy aware of every single move, and there is no hiding. But of
Yeah,
course, it's up
I think
to
the game was poker, and the grandmother
yeah.
refused to play it
Oh, it was
because she
poker.
said the poker
No, it
opponent
was a
knows
grandmother.
the cards that I have on my hand. So she refused to play it because she did not believe that it would disregard this information. And
Yeah,
that's really important to know as a like a game designer. You need to really consider what sort of information does my artificial intelligence need to know and act upon. Like, if you have a shooter game with hit scan type shooting, you click and it hits where the aim is. If the bot always aims on the player and it always shoots with the information that it's given, then it's not a very entertaining to play against when the weapons are hit scan because
yep.
it will always hit the mark. And I remember like in nightmare mode in I think it was Quake 1. If you played against a bot in the hardest difficulty, as soon as you had direct line of sight to the bot, it would shoot you. Like literally there was no chance in hell that you could beat a bot like that unless you in a way cheated. And by cheated I mean use rocket launchers or weapons like grenades, use things that had like a delayed reaction. Then you kind of lob the grenade around the corner, hope the bot ran right into it. Because if you had direct line of sight to the bot, you were dead. You were literally dead within a second.
Yeah, but I think it's not very relevant to this discussion. But the if you design badly, like the computer is like if I make a board game, right? I can throw dice, and let's say the dice are not tampered with. I mean, I could tamper the dice also. Then there's no randomness in it anymore. But I can't know what the next, and the board game doesn't know, right? If I throw a dice, it doesn't know what the next result is gonna be. Whereas a
Yeah.
computer game, you can calculate each roll that it's gonna do. The only thing it doesn't know necessarily in every game is what order it's gonna happen in. Like it could have like that the player decides to do something else, and then the order changes, and then the random results also change. But it can predict each. So if it's a turn-based game, it can predict every roll because there is no true randomness in computers. There's only mathematical formulas that try to mimic randomness.
Yeah. Imagine playing a board game on like super hard setting. How would you emulate that? Like, let's say you're playing Monopoly. How would you emulate hard difficulty? That would be something like saying, the hard player or the AI can never roll a 1 out of 6. It will always roll like a minimum of 2 or 3 on its moves, stuff like that. That would be how I guess you would emulate having a hard AI or opponent
Well, in
in a game
Monopoly,
like Monopoly.
other games you could also have the enemy AI play with this other set of cards, like a deck of cards. Or if you're saying a single player game, even board game, you can change the deck of cards. Like that's what they do in Arkham Horror, for example. They use play with different sets of cards depending on the difficulty.
Oh, right. So like they take out stuff. Let's say, you have a game where you can heal yourself. They take out some of the heals.
Yeah, exactly. And then you also
Yeah.
have other end bosses, and they have totally different mechanics even. So depending
Yeah.
on what end boss you choose, you also choose different sets of decks that you play with, and you also choose actually events. Like the board is the same, but the events are different, and then the main fight, the boss main The fight of the main boss is different. So you will fight him with totally different mechanics. Like he has a different vulnerability than the other one. Those like Arkham Horror is always hard, but it definitely has hardness levels. You need to.
And it's one of these games, the aim is to not go crazy, I'm assuming.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So
I
you have
love that.
sanity,
Cosmic
you
horror.
have health, you have,
Yeah.
and then the whole idea is that you will always be underprepared, but you still have to prepare, and you will always have too little time. So time in that again, as we had that as one of the first mechanics, the second mechanic in my version, the time. That's basically what it plays into. That you never have enough time, and especially if you're not dividing your group. But then again, in a horror setting, dividing your group is probably again not such a good idea.
That's only a good idea if you're filming it and planning to release DVD. Then by all means, tell everyone to split up and go out and get murdered in horrific ways on camera.
The whole I played Markham Horror, and my character, so basically he was stuck in an infinite loop of accidents where he couldn't do anything for half of the game. So he was basically just like, whoops, tripped into a Whirlpool gate, and then oh, whoops, slipped on a banana peel. That's like, it was the most hilarious
Oh,
thing.
boy.
Like everybody was so pissed at me as the player, like I was intentionally trying to sabotage everything when I'm just like, my dice roll are just bad, and I just keep going through these. Like I was going to, like basically my character was just like stuck for half the game. But I ended up killing the boss in the end anyway, so which was very interesting. Like I got the final blow.
So were you just really unlucky with rolls, or did you literally have some sort of like a curse on you that made everything?
No, I was just unlucky. I can't remember all the terms what that happened there, but there's different layers of the universe. So there's different spaces. Like there's I can't remember all of the names, but they basically have these discrete spaces where, like for example, you can be lost in space or something, lost in something, and that's just like a place where you either are or not, and it's like you're in all dimensions, like
limbo.
Yeah, limbo, and my character was there for a long time and then somewhere else and slipping on a banana peel and not able to get out of there and stuff like that.
Oh.
But hey, we were lucky in the end, I guess. It wasn't luck after that. I just managed to get enough to actually matter in the boss battle and then got through that alive. Whereas other characters did die there. Anyway, that's the interesting.
Speaking of beating bosses, I think it's time to move on to mechanics 3, or I guess it's 4 in your case. Actions.
Yeah. So I could read the lens first. So the lens of secrets. So lens 29. Change who has what information, and you change your game completely. To use this lens, think about who knows what and why. Ask yourself these questions. What is known by the game only? What is known by all players? What is known by some or only one player? Would changing who knows what information improve my game in some way? Game playing is decision making. Decisions are made based on information. Deciding the different attributes, their states, and who knows about them is core to the mechanics of your game. Small changes to who knows what information can radically change a game. Sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse. Who knows about what attributes can even change over the course of a game. A great way to create drama in your game is to make an important piece of private information suddenly become public. Sup, Moiko Plays? Welcome.
Yeah, what you just mentioned there about a way to make a private information public. That could be like, let's say we're talking about a shooter or something, like if you have the leading player, as soon as one of the players in this free-for-all game gets too powerful, you could reveal his location on the map for all other players. Or a different way of doing it, like one player has ultra low health, then his location is, something that was hidden is all of a sudden knowledge for everyone. I think it's an interesting way to to change things up. So I wish I had the Lens of Secrets in my book, but I'll just have to get the app.
You just have to get the app. It's a very powerful lens. By the way, Everton Darlin M, welcome to the company Game Devs, and cheers for the follow. Get something to drink. Anyway, I really like it because, for example, the game Werewolf or Mafia or all of these, it's one of my favorites, 5 favorite games, it basically is a game just about secrets and revealing them, and even in RPGs, they really reveal secrets about characters. For example, Arcanum was a really great RPG, a digital one, where if you play as a good guy, get to know, like if your karma is good, like they have this karma system, right? So if you play as a good guy, you actually get to know different plot than if you play the bad guy. And then when you play the bad guy, you actually get to know more about the good side, and things start flipping, like in a way that, because you didn't know certain information, like most people play the good guy first, not all, but anyway. So if you play that first and then you play the bad guy, suddenly you don't think necessarily the good guys are as good as you thought they were, or maybe they didn't know everything and things like that. So that was very excellent game.
And yeah, it sounds like it.
Exactly. It's not even like a mechanic in itself, you could say. Like, it's just how they wrote the story.
Yeah.
Like in the new Star Wars Battlefront 2 game? Oh, I haven't played that. Hey, Hogs Object, welcome to the company Game Devs. Cheers for the follow. But this is definitely a lens. Like in my current game I'm developing, I need to look through this lens. I think I could make this game more interesting, thinking about what does the player know and what doesn't he or she know, and then through that, I probably can make the game more interesting because, changing the, idea of the game. Like, again, one great game, I actually never finished it, but I've heard enough to know that it did it, was Bioshock. I'm trying to think. Wasn't that the name of the game, or is that the name of the company? What is it called?
I think the game was called Bioshock. It's
like
it's the one about the the AI that takes control of things. Isn't it Bioshock? I don't know. It doesn't really matter. Anyway, hello to Captain Kangaroo, Nathan Orchid. Welcome, Mike. And that was my worst impression of Australian. I'll have to practice heaps. I'll have to practice heaps.
I'm not even gonna try. It's gonna be an embarrassment and lawsuits.
An insult to all of Australia.
Yeah, I am an insult to the world. Let's move on.
I can't really tell if Nathan is joking. He says amazing accent.
He never jokes.
I hope. I don't know. I don't think he doesn't seem like the joking guy. Yeah. Like this one time on Honest Dan's stream, he put on the Australian flag as a cape, and then he had a hat on that also Australia, and he had glasses on with like Australia stuff.
I saw that too.
So,
what's
you saw it?
I don't know.
It was funny.
Tasty Graph is a joke. I mean, no, I mean.
Yes, I am one big joke. It's my life a joke.
My father called me a joke, so I don't understand. Yeah, our fathers all call us jokes. That's, everybody who has to do with games. I mean, this is not a real profession. You can't make money making games. Which is true.
Yeah. Aussies are born memers.
Yeah.
Kappa.
Kappa. So, Captain Kappa. Is that actually a character? Anyway.
Captain Kangaroo.
Oh.
Super Jesse says, a joke is a display of humor in which within a specific and well-defined narrative structure to make people laugh and is not meant to be taken seriously.
What does seriously mean? Anyway, let's move on. So mechanic 4. So we've had the mechanic of space, the mechanic of time, the mechanic of object, attribute, and states. And then we have the mechanic of action. So the secrets is part of the whole objects, attributes, and states. I just think it should be on the same level as everything else. Hey, Amet, welcome to the company of Game Devs. Cheers for the follow.
Now, mechanic number, whatever this number is, actions, that's really, really interesting for me because that's one of the things that I've found a lot of times when I use the term a verb for an action on a character. When I say, he needs more verbs, people are like, what? And that's a very clear example of speaking a language that people aren't familiar with. But I really like how, you have operative actions, which are basically things that the player can do. And these actions are, so one verb could be to move forward, to shoot, that's a verb, or to jump is a verb. And that's basically what this mechanic thing is about. And we kind of split these actions into two. See, that's the third cat. That's the last one on screen. Actions can be divided into two types. You've got operative action, which is like jumping, shooting, whatever. And then you have the resultant action, which is basically the why and the how of your operative action. So let's say I have a pawn. My pawn can move forward, but it can move forward for various reasons. It can move forward to block an attacker. It can move forward in order to attack someone. It can move forward in order to reach the end of the chess area in order to become a king or whatever. I don't know, but that was off the top of my mind. So I like how you have this thing with a verb with an action, and it's kind of two things. Like, it's the simple description what it does, and then there's a description of the result that happens when you do it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know if there's anything else. So basically, actions are what can players do, which are verbs.
Yeah.
Then he
and
goes.
I think.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, go on. No, go on.
Well, he just explains it, at least in my version, very shortly, and then he goes into emerging gameplay. Does it do that same thing in your book?
Yeah, it does in a way. I mean, he basically says he lists up things that you can do in order to encourage or create emergent gameplay. But I think it's important to talk about what emergent gameplay is, because I don't think everyone knows what emergent gameplay is.
Yeah, and that's actually, I think it's even hard to define, or even like it can be defined, but it's kind of hard. It's hard to kind of explain, and he does it quite well. The emergent gameplay is kind of, how would I explain it? I would explain it as, using things in ways that not necessarily even the creator has thought of.
Yeah.
Meaning that there's more than one way to solve a problem, and you can say that the reason I feel like it's also very important to say that the creator has not always thought about it. That's the best emerging gameplay. Sometimes they have thought about all of these, but a lot of times when they have thought of all of those, like that these are the three possible ways to beat a boss or do something, a lot of the time it doesn't feel very emergent. As much as if it's like, oh, I just give you these tools, and here are like for example, Minecraft. It's like, here you can build stuff. Here's a world. Every night, zombies gonna come here, and you need to just survive. You can do it however you want, but I give you a lot of different ways to do it. And then, the creator of Minecraft, they maybe not think about that. Oh, you're gonna build a trap that traps each zombie and gives you, all their drops, and then you abuse the system or something. I don't know. That's maybe not emerging, but that's more abusing the system. But anyway, or you could either dig a hole, you could build a pillar, you could do a lot of different things.
Yeah. Well, the author kind of describes emergent gameplay and encouraging emergent gameplay as kind of being a gardener and making sure that your soil is ready to grow things in it. And he then lists these, let's see how many there are. I think it's 5. Yeah, 5 different ways of encouraging emergent gameplay. And if it's not entirely clear yet, emergent gameplay is basically when new rules and methods of playing appear from, I guess, in a way, an unintended use of a verb or use of an action. Like, let's say you have a shooter game, and in this shooter game, you have fall damage on the player and on all the enemies. And then you have this verb called shooting. I can now shoot things, and now I'm going to make it so that I can also shoot objects in the game. I can shoot the walls and break them. I can shoot floors or whatever and break them. If I shoot the floor under a boss and he falls down and takes fall damage and dies, then in a way that is emergent gameplay. One might say, okay, well, that's kind of obvious. You know, he would have easily done that. So then they fix this thing where you can no longer shoot the floors to make holes. But then at some point later, there's a weapon that can push bosses. Then you combine the shooting of a wall with pushing the boss over the edge, like through the wall, and he falls down some other place. In a way, that's kind of emergent gameplay.
Yeah.
Yes, Moiko Play. I am the guy on the left. I'm the guy wearing the World of Warcraft doll behind me.
Wearing.
Yeah, because I was about to say
Oh, yeah.
wearing. I was about to say wearing the red shirt. Like, no,
Oh.
he has a red shirt too. That's a really bad thing.
Yeah, we didn't.
I'm the guy sporting the doll, and it's not a sex doll. It's my girlfriend's. It's not my girlfriend.
What? It's not
It
your
belongs.
sex doll.
It's not my doll. It belongs to Lady Wrath.
You
She
just
put it
said
there.
that it's not your sex doll. It's your wife's sex doll.
It's hers. She owns
It's
it.
her
It's
fault.
not mine.
Yeah. Anyway. So, yeah, I think the example you gave is really good, and one thing I noticed, especially people who just started a game, like designing games, is that
She's in the living room yelling, "I love my doll." She's like, "I love it. Don't talk bad about my doll." Sorry, honey.
So, what I think this is an interesting thing from point of view, especially if you just started making your first game, is that I noticed a lot of beginner game makers, what they do is they actually stumble upon emerging gameplay. And what happens then is that they remove it because they think that it's not what they intended to make, which is understandable, and that's also a good okay choice. But I see so many awesome games, like especially when you're just new because you don't have preconceptions. Sometimes you create the craziest of games, but then you lose it because you make it like every other game. It's like, I wanted to make Mario, and then you make this little thing that kind of works weirdly because you didn't really know how to make Mario. And then, it's like Mario jumps into space and he's like shooting fireballs all over the place, and then everybody's laughing playing it, and it's hilarious. But then the person goes back like, no, I just want to make a copy of Mario. And then he goes and does it the proper way. And then it just becomes a copy of Mario, which is, like, Mario is, again, amazing game. But a copy of Mario is probably quite boring. People have played it, and, it's a lot of... It would take a lot of work to beat it anyway. So instead of going then on that tangent, which is kind of the emerging gameplay, then they stick with the rigid.
Do you want to go like the 5 points that can kind of encourage?
I do think
emerging
it would
gameplay?
be. We probably shouldn't read the whole. They're quite long, at least in my version.
No, just like, well, one of them is add more verbs, and by verbs again we're talking about actions. So that's one way of getting more emergent gameplay. Let's say you have an infinite runner. So in your infinite runner, you have one verb. it's jumping. If you add another verb, which could be sliding or invisibility or shooting, well, that's one way of adding more verbs, and that will also encourage more emergent gameplay. Number two?
Yeah, number 2, verbs that can act on many objects. So what that means is that if you put in a verb like you can jump, you should make it so you can jump on different things. Jump on, you know, or if you make a gun that can shoot stuff, maybe you don't make it just be able to shoot players. That's the example he uses. So you can also make it shoot off locks of doors, break windows to go through them. You can make it to hunt for food because you can shoot deer and then you get food, or pop a car tire. So these are all different ways. You're still using the same verb or action, but you can use it many different ways. And I think this is a very, very strong thing. So it's probably of these, and he even says the most powerful thing you can do. And something you definitely like, something I think about constantly is that if I add something to the game, I should at least come up with 5 different ways of using it, not just the one. Because if you don't find enough ways to use it, especially in a smaller game, it might become very like glued on, and it's just like a small thing.
Yeah, or it can feel obsolete because players are going to want to use whatever has the most uses. So that's a good point. Number 3 is goals that can be achieved more than one way, and it's kind of linked to the verbs that it can act on many objects. But if we look back at, no, I'm not Jesse Shell. If we look back at the example about the shooting the floor damage, etc., that's 2 different ways of defeating an enemy. Third way could be, let's say you introduced a verb with invisibility. Well, defeating a boss doesn't necessarily mean that you're killing him, but it could also just mean like moving past him. Or if we're looking at a game like Super Mario, the end boss doesn't necessarily have to be killed with fireballs or jumped on. I don't even think you can jump on the bosses, but I don't remember. But you can skip him and then cut the ropes to his bridge instead, and he'll fall down. And that's different ways of achieving the same result, which is really, really a powerful way to make your game feel more interesting for players. Or just make the game or the player able to make more interesting decisions along the way. So, again, a game is a series of interesting decisions at its core. At least for me, it is. So number 4.
Yeah. So many subjects. So he uses checkers here, which I haven't played a lot, which is why it's a bit difficult to explain. But so basically, it's like, just because, like, it's more for strategy games, you have many choices you can do. So instead of having just one, like, this doesn't, first off, he says it doesn't work for every game, but like, let's say you would play, StarCraft, but you could only move one character at a time. It would become quite, like, it would be basically a top-down shooter. But because they add many subjects you can control or can do with, you can actually, it becomes a strategy game because you have to choose who you move, where you move. When you move like a group of your troops to another place, that also leaves a space for for other people to move in there. So that's, again, so think about the number of things you can control. And that's how at least I saw it. I don't know if you had a different understanding of it. Double the views. James. But yeah, that's basically how I understood the many subjects. Basically having many subjects under you, not many subjects as in, it's both a space, it's talking about how to save people, but also talking about, like, not subjects, but subjects as people you control.
Yeah. It's also a really good tool for finding new mechanics, which I guess is why they think
Ooh.
A new
about it.
yet
We
magical
have
love
Subby Subby.
continues.
Wait, dude. Just one moment. Honest Dan, thank you for the resub. And also, what did you say? A new yet magical love continues. I had to interrupt you, Daisy, but we couldn't hear what you were saying because the text to speech was talking about you.
Oh, okay. Can I talk? Am I muted?
No, you're not muted.
Okay, cool. So we didn't even get the point where I said the sub about Dan. I saw it in chat. Don't worry, that's perfectly fine.
Please some
Anyways,
hype in chat, by the way, guys, for Dan. He's
yes,
awesome. Thank you
let's
for
hype.
supporting us doing weird stuff like this, reading what these things called books, which you like killing trees to make books that we can read for you guys. You this is making it bad. It's like, oh, you sub, we kill trees. No,
It is a good book. I mean, it really
it's
can
worth a
help
3 or
the
2.
team. It is, but you could buy it digitally if you don't want.
Yeah, I usually buy books digitally, but if I would, when I do this type of things, there is a benefit of having it in physical form.
I am from Norway, so I like to kill the trees, and also I don't like to use the digital things. So
Hey.
I buy only real books to kill trees. I don't like them.
Hey, Finland, if I remember correctly, Finland has the highest concentration of trees anywhere in the world per square mile or square
That
kilometer.
sounds about right. Because when I was in Helsinki, I was in
You were
awe. Like there was so many trees inside the city.
Yep.
You know, it's like you've got two roads, and then in the middle of these two roads, there's like a forest, even though we're in the middle of a city. It was freaking awesome.
Yeah. So
But you had a lot of emos. That was kind of weird. It was like the young people.
emotes,
Emos.
Oh
Emo.
yeah, we have the
Yeah,
whole metal scene here, I guess. So
yeah, it was like a lot of the young kids were maybe 10, 12 years behind in terms of fashion. I was
fashion.
like, yeah, I was like, hey, you Finnish people, why are you? That was like Green Day 10 years ago. Come on, move on, people.
Things have changed though here. People are more.
I was there last year, dude. I was there last year.
Last year, yes, that is very long time ago.
Oh, in Finnish time, 1 year is actually.
We're now in. We're listening to disco music and fighting the war.
Listening to disco music. Have you
Yeah,
heard the
disco
new one
tough.
from Elvis Presley?
Yeah. Oh, I've heard of him, but it's a bit too daring. Okay,
Yeah.
get back to book club. Okay, thank you,
Sorry.
Dan. I will get
Thank you,
back
Dan.
by your order. So the fifth one, do you want to take the fifth?
Yes.
Pledge the fifth?
I didn't actually finish what I was talking about though, and
Oh.
the like how you get the new mechanics
Okay,
with
then
many
explain.
subjects.
Do it. I don't remember where we were, so.
We were at the many subjects, and
Okay.
this thing about, let's say you have one character and that's what you're controlling, or in the case of, you have a bullet and it shoots one bullet and that bullet can then explode. So a way of using the many subjects rule, say, okay, well, let's try with 5 bullets out of this gun. Is that going to change emergent gameplay? It might, because you're shooting a target and only one of the bullets hits the target, the other 2 moves past it and does other things in the back, like that. Let's say you mix that with shooting a hole in the wall, then maybe some players would start to use the shotgun, because then you would shoot a guy, he would die, and stuff around him would get hit as well, create a hole in the wall, and that would become emergent gameplay for speedrunners, because they would with one shot kill an enemy and then move past. So my point is, it's not only for play a character, it could also be a case of adding more enemies or a case of adding more projectiles to your weapons.
Yeah, I guess it's about thinking about how many, like it says here, times verbs times objects. So how the verbs can interact with as many objects as possible.
Exactly. So number 5.
Yeah.
The fifth way of trying to promote more emergent gameplay in your game is side effects that change constraints. And I've talked to a lot of streamers about this as well when they were making their games. I've introduced the idea of sour with sweet, where let's say you have a power up, and this power up makes you run faster. Um, but introduce something negative to it as well as a way to kind of change the way that this power up works and to make it a bit more interesting in some way and to create some sort of dynamics. And I think a really good example of emergent gameplay, if you look at some of the old what are they called, the Daggerfall, Skyrim, that line of games, Elder Scrolls, they had make your own spell system where you could combine a lot of things, and you also had characters that could have negative things like negative buffs on them. It could be something like, if I pick this race, then I take more damage from this type of magic. If you mix that with making a spell that makes it so that whenever you take this type of damage, you get health back, that sort of, those two negatives changed the constraints of the game, and that made it so that some players figured out that if you mix these two things, you can actually heal yourself with a powerful heal because you're vulnerable to the damage, but your trait makes it so that you get health from this. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, exactly. Um, it's basically about um, the giving like the unplanned kind of interaction with side effects and how side effects can change how um, basically how everything is played. Even there is a danger with that where you can create like even that health thing that is also a good thing, but also in some measures it can be a bad thing. So it definitely is something. Again, I would, as a game designer, I would always allow it, but there's definitely game designers who don't want that, and it depends then on if it is a competitive game or not. So in a competitive
Yeah,
game, you should be careful with this, but if it's a non-competitive game, you should just go crazy with this because
exactly.
because it kind of gives also kind of the power to the player to come up with interesting combinations. I think Diablo even does. Like people think about some like for example some like in Diablo even like there's some that you can even try to like you said like negate the side effects, or then you kind of have make people play in a weird way where for example they have a set of magic like or like magic finding set of gear, and then they have their other set of gear, so which builds culture around your game, which I think is also important. So
Mm,
not just trying to control everything, but allowing for experimentation.
yeah.
Oh,
And another thing, we'll get to that a little bit later, but rules. If you have games like what we talked about with the Elder Scrolls series, where something becomes a bit too powerful, if it's being played in a competitive type of environment, then you'll very quickly find that people make rules that say you cannot do this or that. Even though the game says you can do it, people will make laws that say, if you want to participate in our community, if you want to play this tournament, you cannot pick this super crazy ability, or you cannot pick this hero because he is deemed unbalanced or unfair in our eyes.
yeah.
So that's a way where sometimes really crappy balance can make the players make their own rules.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's okay, but of course, minimizing if your like if your game is number one intention is to make it a competitive game, it's probably
Yeah,
still something you want to avoid because you have a lot of splitting of community and still
yeah,
arguments, even if everybody agrees like that character is overpowered, sorry, not overbalanced, but he's
yeah. You
too
should always.
balanced.
It's overbalanced. Nowhere I stand, I cannot make him balance.
Actually, that is a thing. We shouldn't go too deep into it, but actually doing competitive games where, depending on the game, where things are overbalanced, meaning that you can never get a competitive edge,
Yeah,
is also. So you should. like if you play StarCraft, different races have different, like, is it good in early game or is it get better in later game? So you do want to have an edge always. It's just how that edge, is made.
If everything is equally balanced to the like really to the minimum detail, I think also you lose the novelty. Like, it doesn't matter which team you pick because they're essentially all the same, even though, one of them looks different. If they play
Yeah.
the same, if they're equally balanced, then a lot of, at least in strategy games, a lot of the interesting gameplay disappears. In shooter games, you're looking for something else. So in shooter games, it's okay for everything to be balanced to the minute detail because a shooter game, if we're looking at something like Counter-Strike, you're not really looking at the differences of skills internally, the virtual skills in the game. You're looking at the player skills, which is hand-to-eye coordination and reactions and all of that, the Twitch-based stuff,
Yeah, and
the
of course
physical.
that's what also tips the balance is the skill, of course. But you want it to be, you still don't want it to be exactly balanced throughout the game. But you do want to have players to have counters for things so that they're
Yeah,
not fully like, for example, what happened like cheesing, so called, in StarCraft, where um, if um, if you are a bit better player and you play like you can get through the beginner tiers by just playing Zerg and just building units really fast, and then the other races don't have any units, haven't had built anything. If you time that correctly, you can just wipe them out even before they start playing, which becomes not fun, right?
yeah,
So that's the kind of things that you might want to be careful, like don't involve. And of course, like Microlight says here, like a lot of games have stuff like that. Hearthstone they have banned cards, and yeah, exactly. They
mm,
they will still ban things. It's not like, of course, don't start out trying to intentionally make something that we're not gonna ban anything. We have the perfect game, and then you sit there with your ego. No, you should, of course. It's more about reacting fast and remember you will have stuff that are uh, not balanced, and that's why they use metrics in these things. They look at the win ratio and stuff like that to, uh, you know, uh, to find these imbalances. But which we will come back to actually in the very soon is part of this balancing, I would say. We should probably move forward. This is a very, very long chapter, and we're maybe
yeah.
halfway through it.
Lens of emergence.
Yeah, so the
We
lens of
should talk
emergence.
about that.
Yeah. Do you want to read it?
Sure. Lens number 23 in my book.
And 30 here.
Yeah, the lens of emergence. To make sure your game has interesting qualities of emergence, ask yourself these questions. How many verbs do my players have? So how many actions can your player do? How many objects can each verb act on? How many ways can players achieve their goals? How many subjects do the players control? How do side effects change constraints? So these are a list of questions that you can ask yourself about your game that you're currently working on, in order to promote or create more emergent gameplay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then
Yep.
in my book, it goes straight to, it has like a half a page description, and then it goes to the lens of action.
Yeah, I have the same here. We can just read it, I guess.
Yeah. Do you want me to do it?
Yeah,
I can do
sure.
it. The lens of action. To use this lens, think about what your players can do and what they can't, and why. Ask yourself these questions. What are the operative actions in my game? So basically, what are the verbs, what are the things that I can do, like shooting or jumping or running? And what are the resultant actions? So, like we talked about earlier, I can run, but am I running for cover? Am I running to charge someone, or am I running to press a button that will advance the level? Those are resultant actions. And then it says, what resultant actions would I like to see? How can I change my game in order to make those possible? Am I happy with the ratio of resultant to operative actions? what actions do players wish they could do in my game that they cannot? Can I somehow enable these either as operative or resultant actions? A game without actions is like a sentence without verbs. Nothing happens. Deciding the action in your game will be the most fundamental decision you can make as a game designer. Tiny changes to these actions will have tremendous ripple effects with the possibility of either creating marvelous emergent gameplay or making a game that's predictable and tedious. Choose your actions carefully and learn to listen to your game and your players to learn what is made possible with choices.
Yeah. So just a side note. In the second edition, instead of operational, they call it the basic actions. Instead of resulting, he calls it strategic actions. But they're the same thing. So if you're following along with the second edition, just know that there's a slight terminology shift.
Oh,
I didn't.
and that leads us on to mechanic number 4, rules.
Yep. Rules. The fundamental mechanic. So rules are kind of, well, whereas actions are things you can do, rules are basically the things that limit the actions you can do or change. So it's things that govern. You could say it governs actions actually, and he's put it into. He uses David Parlett, a game historian's kind of diagram of different types of rules. So you have the foundational rules, which are kind of the implicit theoretical basis of a game. Then you have operational rules, behavioral rules, and then there's a lot of like the laws that already Tasty said earlier, which is things that kind of players form themselves, like, or like you could put in competitive, like tournament rules, for example.
Yeah, it's like a subset of rules that add on top of already existing rules for a game. But it's not quite like house rules because they're,
No.
these rules are not just your own rules. They are rules that everyone follows so that
Yeah.
you can compare results almost in a tournament.
Exactly. House rules are separate. I don't know if it's in your book, but it's like
Yeah, they are.
Yeah. So there's a diagram that follows this, and it's probably in Tasty's book too. Let's see if I can get it to
Yeah, I have it.
show.
We should probably just skip it. I mean,
I'll just show it fast. It's too much text and it's very.
exactly. I was just about to say it's so much text.
But
basically, it shows the relationship between the different types of rules and how they shape a game.
Yeah, we need to go forward a bit faster. So, operational rules are basically the easiest. It's basically the rules that the players understand when they play, is what he says. So again, it's the things you actually do, whereas then the functional rules are more like the formal structure underneath it. Like the player should roll a 6 die and then collect that many power chips. Is an operational rule, whereas the foundational would be more like the player's power values increased by a random number from 1 to 6.
Yeah, so as an example, you could say that operational rules are you need to throw a dice in order to move around this field. And the foundational rules are what exactly happens when you land on this particular board location. What are the rules for this location versus the rules for landing on this spot. So in order to play the game, you don't need to know by heart what happens when you land on this spot because it's described usually on a card you get or something.
Yeah. And then there's behavioral rules, which is kind of implicit rules, which are kind of things that the community or the society puts on us. He uses the example of like chess. The rules are that you shouldn't take too long to make your move. It's whereas then in some digital games like Hearthstone, they do it digitally, so you have a limited time, and they do that in chess, of course, too. But you could also think that a rule in some games not to spam chat and stuff like that they're not enforced by like the game rules, but they still are rules to kind of how to behave within the game.
Yeah, and you could say if we go back to Hearthstone, Hearthstone has this sort of special type of chat system where you really can't use it to be rude or ask personal questions and whatnot, because you only have specific pre-written messages that you can use inside of Hearthstone. So that's a way where the game enforces a behavioral rule. And the same thing goes here for our chat. If we look at the chat as sort of a game, if someone comes in here and acts like a total douchebag but doesn't get automatically banned by the system, then I will go in and mute them. That is one of the
I'm
or
scared now.
Bjorn or someone else. A
Tasty,
mod.
what are you doing? That's
A
why the
mod
chat's
will
so
go.
silent. You banned them all.
Yeah, every time you talk, Bjorn, I'm sitting there like, what does this icon do? Timeout, 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 ban, timeout, timeout, ban. Oh, that was me.
It wasn't. This is not a time mechanic.
Spectrum says, side note, I love it when I test my first game on Android. They don't hold back pointing out bugs. Exactly. That's actually kind of interesting because, I use the kids at my work a lot for testing my games when I do something. And usually they're like, they have a lot of suggestions, but it's often difficult for kids the age of like 6 to 10 to kind of look beyond the aesthetics. That they've been told this is a prototype, things are going to change, but they're still like, why is there no effect here? Why doesn't it do that? They're very visual, but they're great for getting feedback. And yeah, they do stuff you never thought.
Yeah, and then you have the written rules, which is basically the thing that nobody reads, the manual. I don't know if we need to go through that more. It's kind of, and of course, digital games. It's basically tutorials that teach you how to play, and then there's a key difference there, is that in board games you have to read the rules and or play with somebody else again, which we already
Yeah.
discussed shortly, to learn or get to know the rules. Whereas in computer games, you can experiment yourself through or get taught by a tutorial. So it's in that way. In a way, it's kind of a. That's why usually I would say that digital games get more emergent gameplay than board games, because you can kind of poke at the rules.
Yeah.
Whereas board
Yeah.
games, you can't really, because there's nothing telling you are you doing right or wrong.
Exactly. And if you do that in a board game, there's always someone else next to you. Like, if what you do goes against their view of the game, they will stop you. Whereas when you play a computer game, either the computer stops you or it doesn't stop you. There's also going to be cases where a player will object to what you're doing. Like, let's look at shooter games with bunny hopping, when they were like crouching and jumping at the same time or something like that. And that allowed them to move faster and also to reach places that you couldn't normally reach. That was frowned upon by a lot of people in the beginning, I remember, because players were angry that other players could do these things and the game didn't stop them. It's like some servers even said bunny hopping is banned, and if they spotted someone doing it, they would get banned, but the game allowed it. Back in the days, a lot of games also had that bug where if you move forward, you move at a specific pace. If you move sideways, you move at a specific pace. If you move both ways at the same time, then you move diagonally at a faster pace combined. So that also meant that in the beginning, a lot of people would zigzag because it meant getting forward faster if you moved in the crisscross pattern. I don't know if you've ever had that in games, Bjorn.
Yeah, definitely. I know exactly what you're talking about, and that's when either laws or behavior rules kicking. Some like behavior rules are more for like what is okay. Is it okay to bounty hop or not? Or then laws where you say that in this tournament, they're still kind of unofficial, I would say. Like the laws of a tournament might be like, oh, we're just gonna play this mode, or we're gonna ban a whole character or a card in a card game, and there's nothing
Yeah.
really stopping you in the game from doing that. It's just the rules of that tournament.
Yeah, not to change the subject too much, but Mr. Croatian says, where can I find some skeleton game development? And it's a really good question. The scope of it, or like the depth, is just too much to be able to answer in this stream. I will say this though, that what we're talking about right now is not necessarily, it's not game development, it's more game design. So it's more talking about the concept of how to create an idea of a game, and how to create rules of a game, and how to tweak a game to make this theoretical thing better in the end. Because actual game development involves programming and graphics design and sound design and marketing and playtesting, all these kinds of we're talking about right now. That's more of an iterative, repetitious process of improving an idea of a game.
Yeah, I don't know if there is. Again, it's do game jams that starts to give you an idea, but it's very hard. It's too wide of a topic, and there is no set rules. Like even this book will be very different from the next book we go through. I would just get, I would maybe start by getting Level Up or this book.
Yeah, I would probably, to start with, I would probably get the Level Up.
Yeah, Level Up is much more approachable.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we've said like there's different rules. Again, Mechanic 5's rules, which is you have again operational rules, foundational rules, behavioral rules. You have the written rules, which were the manuals and that. And then we have the laws, which we kind of shortly discussed, which is like tournament rules. And then you have official rules, which is
we're missing one really important.
Hmm?
The most important rule. One rule to rule them all.
The operational and foundational rules?
It's the goal.
Oh, it's not a mechanic.
Yeah. The most important rule. That is the goal. The definition.
Oh, the most important. Yeah, exactly.
Being able to state the game's goal.
Exactly. Well, we can jump to that.
Yeah.
So the most important rule is the game's goal, and that's something I talk a lot about in my stream, which is, you play a game and you don't know why you're playing, and you don't know what you're supposed to achieve, what you're supposed to do, and how you're supposed to achieve it. And that's the main goal. And you can have sub goals or subsets of goals or a series of goals to get to finishing a game. But it is the most important rule. It's probably the most important part of the game again, which especially to communicate what to do, because it's highly demotivating to play a game where you don't know what you're trying to achieve. And also, if you can't state it very clearly, then most probably your core game design is very weak. So.
Yeah, and that's where, it comes to the part where it says good game goals have three important qualities, which are the goals need to be concrete, like the players need to understand them and clearly be able to state what it is that they're supposed to achieve. And the goals need to be achievable. Players need to think that they have a chance. If they don't feel that they have a chance of achieving the goal, it feels impossible, then they're going to give up. And then goals need to be rewarding. And again, rewards can be defined as many different things. But it needs to have, like a goal needs to have a specific level of challenge. And if it's challenging, then it should be equally rewarding based on the challenge. So if you do something small, you get something small. If you do something big, you should get something big. It has to do with the player's expectation.
Yeah,
which you don't want to inflate. You don't want to give the player too much for too little work, because then you'll reach a point where the player is like, I killed this dragon and all I got was 37 swords, but earlier when I killed the orc, I got 25 swords, so I don't really feel like the dragon was rewarding enough. That's one of the things that you need to be careful.
The amount of swords, that's very important.
Yes.
But I think also, and this is not something that's very difficult to do or add. And I would say that any game needs it. Like if you make a game jam or you make a prototype and it's your first playable, this should be already apparent. It definitely it's gonna be a problem if you already like basically, like I said a lot of times, if you don't, if your game doesn't have a main goal, it is probably not even a game yet. So the first playable is gonna be very bad if you don't, if the player doesn't know the main goal. Like in poker, you know that okay, my main goal is to, defeat and win the round, and then earn as much money as possible. Mr. Crash says, I want to make some money and make some big money. I don't know how to start. I would not get into games if I would like to make money. It's very hard to make money. There's definitely, if you're a programmer or any kind of designer, there's many fields where you can make much more money much easier than games.
Yeah, I would say if you know how to do graphics design or if you know how to do programming, then you're better off making money off freelancing graphics designer or freelancing as a programmer. Um, but that is not to say that you cannot make money making games. Just know that as with every other skill in the world, things take time. You need to practice, you need to get good at it, and you also need to know a lot of different skills. Whereas as a programmer, you know how to program. That's kind of your core skill. That's what you need to be able to do in order to do your job as a programmer. If you want to be a game designer slash game developer, then you need to be good at game design. You need to be good at programming. You need to be good at graphics design. Um, you need to be good at marketing, really good at marketing. You need to be good at socializing, social media, social networks. You need to know people. You need to get to know people. You need to get out and reach people. It takes money to make money,
Yeah.
and it is expensive as a game designer. I know that there are a lot of people who have started with zero, made tons of money, but for every one of these persons, there's probably like a million who started with zero and ended up owing money because they didn't make money. Um, so
Yeah.
yeah,
I would say that I like to say that there's more people who won the lottery than made big money on games.
but isn't that because the world is full of idiots who play the lottery?
Maybe.
No
But
offense to any idiot here who plays the lottery, but you really are if you do. I'm sorry.
and there's no difference from trying to, if you're your sole reason to make games is you think you're gonna get rich really fast. If it was that easy, we all would be rich. More
Yeah.
there game developers who lost everything or they think it's too hard to make. Like instantly they start making a game, they get like, oh my god, there's just so much to do. I don't know where to start.
Mr. Croatian says it looks that it's not how good and playable a game is. It's all about trailers, so a game can be bad, but you can make money with good PR. Uh, well, I guess maybe in Croatia because you have a different economy there. But in the rest of the world, as things are right now, if you make a crappy game, even if your PR and your trailers are great, people will buy your game and then they will return it right after.
Yeah, a lot of
So,
these,
so that's
especially
not really an
Europe,
option.
you get your money back. So
Yeah, there are more and more rules now to protect consumers, to protect the players from bad developers, which I think is really good because we have seen many, many bad developers. If you can't refund your game, then people are probably not going to buy it. Hello, Denadaville. Welcome to the channel.
by the way, Muster Wrestle and Edenfire, welcome to the Cafe Gamers. Cheers for the follow. So, but that's we didn't read the Lens of Goals, right? I don't know if there's much more. He talks about it very in deep, but I think we can just jump to the Lens of Goals, which is
Yep.
to ensure the goals of your game are appropriate and well balanced. Ask yourself these questions: What is the ultimate goal of my game? Is that goal clear to the players? If there is a series of goals, do the players understand that? Are the different goals related to each other in a meaningful way? Are my goals concrete, achievable, and rewarding? Do I have good balance of short and long-term goals? Do players have a chance to decide on their own goals? So these are the things that you need to think about. And this is something you should start off like. I would even say that it feels a bit silly that it's so late in the book almost, because this is, or like he is kind of really saying like this is the most important thing, but at the same time I would like to bold it and put it on the front page of the book, saying this is the book of ultimate goals of making a game.
Yeah, I was trying to look back in the book to kind of see do we even get into, like, we have ideas and we have all of the plans kind of describe things around the game, but this is really the first time in the book where we reach the meat on the bones. This is like the goal is the most important part of a game. No goal, probably no game. I mean, there are games that succeed with, like, I guess original Minecraft with survival.
Yeah,
There was really no goal there, in a way.
No, not really. Well, you have, again, sandbox games are on the edge, so they really are like. But then again, there's a lot of sandbox games that don't really work. So I still think it has a goal, which is to survive, right? So yeah, but the sandbox games are on the edge, and that's the thing. Is Second Life a game or a virtual environment? I mean, you can make a game within a virtual environment too. So we don't have to go that deep. It is something that definitely is worth thinking about. But I would say most cases, if you're working on a game, you should have an ultimate goal. Except if you're making a sandbox game, but then you should be knowing that you're making a sandbox game. Also, if you're a lone developer, you probably should not be making a sandbox game. Except if you're super talented and know you can pull it off and have a lot of experience. Do you really think that a game like Stardew Valley Holiday cannot make money? I think there's some level of being that big and interesting that can guarantee some success, but not as millions. Well, the thing is, first off, there's nothing that guarantees your game's quality. Because quality, I'm not talking about quality of art, I'm not talking quality of anything else but the quality of gameplay. The only way you can do that is by testing a lot. And testing a lot means with a lot of people, which means you have to have marketing to get it into hands of a lot of people so you can get results, or you have to pay for it, which means you have to have money. Trust me, if you think you know your game is the best game in the world, you're probably delusional. The only way you would know it is because other people know it. So games are only, and then it's in the hands and faces and the experience of other people than you, especially when it comes to making money. How much you love your game is not going to make yourself money. So that said, yes, let's say theoretically you would somehow know that it's the best game ever, and you wouldn't have to have a big player test bed like Blizzard does. You could probably make some money, but again, people need to know about it. So there's a lot of like quite good games that deserve much more attention and money, but they're not getting that these days. And also, usually it actually falls apart before even it gets released if you don't have like enough traction. When do you think? When do you think a game should be abandoned? That's a very wide topic. You need to feel.
I answered that.
Okay, good.
I said when you're 10 months away from finishing your team-based shooter, Blizzard releases Overwatch in 1 week. That's a very good indication that you should probably abandon your game.
Yeah, and I think in the end, it's your game. You need to decide that. You can go and make your game until you die, and that's fine. But you need to be honest with yourself. That is the most important thing. If Overwatch was just released and you're making the exact same experience, you need to be honest with yourself that you're probably not going to be able to compete.
Then you could change your game, but depending on the amount of time that it would take to change it, like maybe change your game and reuse the assets for something else. Again, game development is more than just the ideal, like the dream of wanting to create something. If this is your job, if your life and your house depends upon success, then you cannot afford to not accept reality around you. If the game that you're building doesn't, if it's like in direct competition with some of the strongest competitors on the market, then you're taking a huge risk. It's just one of these things where, we can't really say when you should abandon a game. That's why I said it like a joke. If you're making the exact same thing as one of the game companies in the Western world, then you should probably not try to compete with them.
Yeah. I would say that if you ignore marketing and you ignore seeing those other people saying about your games, if you have a lot of testers and you just rely on it becoming abandoned where maybe someone would find it in 60 years, and then you get a lot of money. Dude, you never heard that story. I have not heard of an indie developer being like, "Oh, I released game 2 years later." Like, there's of course stuff that 2 weeks later gets noticed, but like 2 years later, there's not so much. And can you rely on that? That's why I can't kind of promote that type of philosophy. It doesn't mean that it couldn't happen, but again, when you make your game, you're probably putting your life, like Tasty said, like it's a job for you, or you're putting your soul into it, and then kind of in the end, a lot of the time, it is better to just move on, even if you then did get that a bit of abandoned money, because you already learned as much you can from that game, and just move on. And remember, as you release games and you move on, you make smaller games to bigger games, like Latch and Friends has done. They've been making games for 20 years, and they've constantly make bigger experiences. They definitely, and they learn from each one. They built a brand around themselves, and that's the thing. Like, you don't have to put everything into one game. You should, anyway, if you do, that's gonna be like, even if it's a success, that might be your last game because you put everything into that one. What do you think about finding some niche? Well, it's the novelty. Yeah, I have 4 or 5 for some strict niche, for example, or in USA. Well, remember, if it's not right now, if it's popular in USA, this kind of thing, but there's no games around it, there's usually a reason, and hopefully that reason is because people just haven't made it yet, and then you should try it. But dude, make tests first, guys. You don't need to put 60 years on development just to test out an idea. That's why you have prototypes and playable prototypes and testing. So fail fast, fail early, and fail often.
Yeah.
That way you know if what's good. And even in your, like the thing in the book, they said earlier that, remember, when you make prototypes, you don't have to make a prototype with the full game. You can even, within the game's development, create other prototypes that are fully different code base in a totally different engine, that are just more specific to testing a certain problem. So your prototype should have a clear problem that you're trying to solve, and so on. But let's not get too sidetracked.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, like, let's say you have some idea for your game, then don't start making like elaborate graphics and levels that are super perfect and all of that, because that's really not the important part here. It's more important for you to prototype your game, prototype your rule sets, and block out your game feel. Is it delivering the experience that I want? If you're making a game that can only give that experience by having specific graphics, like a AAA Harry Potter RPG game that Microlight says, well, then you're kind of in trouble, because if your game only works on the basis that it has Harry Potter characters in it, then you can't make your game because you don't own Harry Potter. So what you really should be doing, in my opinion, is to try to come up with, okay, so what is it about Harry Potter RPG that I really like? What is it about this game that I want to play? Is it the feeling of being a magician, a sorcerer, a wizard? You're a wizard, Harry. If that's the case, then try to focus on that rather than selling it as your RPG, if you know what I mean. Like try to focus on the experience of being a young spellcaster and then try to come up with ways to make that experience feel strong. Like how can I really make the player feel like he's getting into it? Like he can cast spells and I want to see what these spells do and add more verbs to my character, like not just spell, but fireball and paralyzation and whatever, and kind of build upon that and step away from things that you don't own is my tip.
Mr. Creation is saying, I want to make a survival MMO, but everybody does that today. What to do? First off, do you know what it is to make MMO survival game? Because again, you might be confusing wanting to play your idea of a survival MMO game to actually making one. Because again, the actions required to make a game are the same actions that it requires to play a game. This is something that I notice a lot of people getting confused about. Like they just imagine a game they would like to play, and of course you probably want to make that too. There's nothing wrong with that, and usually there is some similarity, cohesion between that. But also you should also realize what it is to make something like that, because there's a lot of things you probably don't want to do in that, even if there was not so many people working in that or making that type of game. You should really consider if it's just you making it, you're probably gonna be overwhelmed with stuff to do, and a lot of it is not gonna be stuff you love to do. From 3D rigging to network programming to all this stuff. And if you love that, then you're doing the right way. Don't get me wrong. I'm just saying if these are things you don't like. I would say not everybody's doing survival games. Right now, Battle Royale games are more in the hype, and we're going to see more of that type of games. Not really survival. Survival games are kind of last years and a couple of years ago. Which means there might be in the next 4 or 5 years, there might be again an empty slot where we could have a couple new ones. Yeah, real-time physics in networking is difficult. Anyway,
yeah, sounds like a headache.
Yeah, it is.
So we've reached the lens of rules now?
Yeah, so lens of rules. So lens of goal, again, one of the most important thing. What is the ultimate goal of your game? So then we have wrapping up rules, which is the lens of rules. For me, it's the lens 33 in the second edition. And it's
26 for me.
26 in the first edition of the book. And it says, to use this lens, look deep into your game until you can make out its most basic structure. Ask yourself these questions. What are the foundational rules of my game? How do these differ from the operational rules? Are these laws or house rules that are forming as the game develops? Should these be incorporated into my game directly? It's probably something you would notice if you test anyway. Are there different modes in my game? Do these modes make things simpler or more complex? Would the game be better with fewer modes? More modes? Who enforces the rules? Are the rules easy to understand, or is there confusion about them? If there's confusion, should I fix it by changing the rule or by explaining them more clearly? There is a common misconception that designers make games by sitting down and writing a set of rules. This usually isn't how it all happens at all. A game's rules are arrived at gradually and experimentally. The designer's mind generally works in the domain of operational rules, occasionally switching to the perspective of foundational rules when thinking about how to change or improve the game. The written rules usually come toward the end once the game is playable. Part of the designer's job is to make sure there are rules that cover every circumstance. Be sure to take careful notes as you play test, because it is during these tests that holes in your rules will appear. If you just patch them quickly and don't make a note, the same hole will just show up again later. A game is its rules. Give them the time and consideration that they deserve.
Yes. Yes, yes.
Where did you get this book you're reading from? So this book you can get on Amazon. There's a link below. Just click it. So yeah, rules are the fundamentals. Actually, playing this is the reason I really strongly recommend making a couple of board games, because once you make a board game, you will have so much more information on what it is to be a designer. Making and designing a digital game kind of obscures it behind programming and an art. Whereas board games, it's very it's almost, I mean, you have board game art too. You don't really have board game programming per se. It's all in the rules.
Yeah, but that's a form of programming, and the danger of making a computer game is that you are concealing a lot of your rules in a way where you don't really need to be able to formulate them in a way that makes sense to players. Whereas if you're making a board game, you really have to think about rules. You have to think about, how can I write down my rules in a way that is easily understandable by a normally mentally functioning human being. And if you can do that, that is a really good step along the way to being able to program it. Because if you can describe it, you can program it. Pretty much.
Yep.
And most of us, if not all of us, made games when we were kids. We made board games, or we took paper and drew cards, and we cut them out with a scissor, and even though you sat there with the paper cards and you could see through them with the light, you still pretended like you were playing card games against your friend, and they totally couldn't see what you were holding in your hand. But still, it's a really good way to learn how to put your rules and your laws into words, writing down your ideas, making them concrete. And Pico Fighter says, we pretended that we were characters in the game. Yeah, exactly. Imagination.
Yeah. Michael said, damn, I would love to spend 4 or 5 hours talking to you both about game dev and stream without any plan. I mean, just sit and drink coffee. Yeah. It's kind of what we do on Thursday, except, of course, without voice. Thursdays, I usually just work on my game, talk about anything. No strict kind of formula. The reason it is to go, even if you don't like books, well, this is a format to read this book without reading it, is to follow along our small series. And the idea of this is to introduce all kinds of things to start thinking about. And I know it's overwhelming. If you made a game, it's overwhelming. If you haven't, it's totally overwhelming. There's so many different things you need to think about. But also, I think starting to kind of grasp that by just hearing about it is gonna level you up as a game designer and a game creator. Because in the end, at some point or another, you will have to think about it, or it will happen by accident, meaning that you might not be in control of what's happening. Oh, Tasty is not on the stream in voice, but he is here in chat usually.
Yeah, I try to hang out and chat on Tuesdays, because it's also one of my favorite streams on Tuesday, where I get to see all the stuff that you guys submit. And I'm going to put it here in chat.
Yeah. So.
And then Bjorn plays them.
Bjorn plays
and
them
talks crap
and
about them.
Sucks. No, I don't really talk crap. I just suck.
He's like, I don't like your game. There's no goal. What is endogenous value? Stupid game.
Endogenous. Where is the dog in this game? I want more dogs. I love
Yeah.
dogs. If it doesn't have
And
dogs,
this is a reference to one of the previous chapters. It talks about endogenous values, which are basically internal values in the game that make you want to get more of these things because they have an endogenous value. So this has become an in-house joke. If you want to understand more crappy in-house jokes, just follow along in book club and you will too know what language we're talking.
exactly. So then
So
we should really move on because we've
yeah,
already. How long have we been going for? Like 3 hours soon. This is a long
yeah.
chapter, like I said.
It's a
Um,
good thing we didn't do 2 chapters last time. I knew this one. Mechanics skill. Mechanic skill is what we've reached now. And it basically talks about 3 types of skills. It talks about physical skills, it talks about mental skills, and it talks about social skills. And these are skills that you want to think about. How does it challenge my player? Does it require my player to have physical skills? A physical skill could be how fast are you at using the mouse, or how good are you at using the game controller, swinging the wands around in virtual reality stuff. Mental skills are things like memory, observation, puzzle solving skills. And then you have social skills, which are relevant in games like poker, where you kind of need to hide the cards that you're sitting with. I mean, not like literally, but you need to somehow be able to not reveal to your opponent what sort of cards you're sitting with. Or the werewolf game that we're talking about. You need to figure out who's who amongst you in the game. So yeah, do you have anything to add to the description of those 3 skills?
no, we can move on. So then he also splits it into real versus virtual skills. You didn't cover that, right?
No,
So
I didn't cover that.
so real skills is basically something that the player himself has, like an FPS, that he has the skill to shoot somebody with really low reaction time or hit the enemy really accurately. Versus virtual skills is more like what you can see in an RPG, where the characters' skills level up, and that's why it becomes easier, or the character becomes better. And those are
Yeah.
good to differentiate when you talk about skills. So is it a real skill or a virtual skill? A real skill is something that the player, like if you play Tekken, you probably get real skill. The character doesn't change really. He's always had the ability to do all the super moves, usually in most fighting games. But then in virtual skills, you would just be mashing a button and then it does different things over time. The character gets better just because you've been mashing the button more. Simplification.
Spectrum has an interesting question. Spectrum says, is there a different definition of social in games when you interact with real players or NPCs? So I'm assuming that your question is, when you're interacting with humans, you're relying on your own social skill. What sort of skill are you relying on when you are interacting with an NPC? And that really depends on what kind of game are you playing. Like, let's say you're playing a game where some super smart person like Björn has programmed an AI that reacts just like a human. In that case, I would say in the beginning, you are using your social skill, but the more you play it, the better you are at figuring out how the enemy will respond to your social actions. And then it becomes a game of memory. So it's like now you're using your mental skill rather than your social skill. In the beginning, you use social skills to figure out how does that work. Now you're using your memory to remember how did he react when I did this and that and that. So how can I manipulate the NPC to react in a way that I want it to? Yeah, sorry, go on.
No, that was good. That was good that you explained. That was a really good question. I didn't even think about that aspect when reading this. And then he goes on with enumerating skills, which means that kind of going through all the skills that are required for a game, either virtual, I guess, or real. So, but specifically the real is good to kind of what are the skills I would like to require from my player, and how am I taking that in consideration when designing my game. And he goes through the whole thing with RC Pro Am, which is a game where you couldn't shoot an enemy and at the same time press the acceleration button. Whereas, for example, on the Xbox controller, you could easily with the triggers, but back in the day in the Nintendo, you couldn't. So what people developed was a skill where they hold the controller in a different angle so they could keep it down and then press. So that was a skill they had to develop. That was probably unintentional, maybe. I don't know. Hard to say.
Yeah, it was basically a case of a game control at the time for that game only had the X directionals and then it had the A and the B. And in this game, you had to press A to move forward in your car and press B to shoot. But since most people would be holding the controller with their thumb, then it'd be hard to hold down one button while also occasionally pressing the other button. So from a game developer's perspective, their thought was the skill the player needs to have here is to be able to shoot at the right times, whereas in reality, the skill required by the player was to change the way they held the controller. So all of a sudden it became a game of holding the controller in the right way, and the people that held it properly were able to shoot and move at the same time. I would hold it like this. I would basically shoot like this. So I held my controller like that, and I would rest it on my lap.
You know, he would play it like this. Let's see. Can he see it already? Now he can see it. Now he's laughing. Now he's responding.
Can you see it already?
It's like
when I say stuff, it comes out at the same time. You're tired now.
No, it doesn't.
I'm seeing.
The stream.
It does.
It's delayed.
Yeah, but it's synced to my movement and stuff. So if I'm saying I'm doing something now,
no.
We'll see it.
I was. You will see it when you go and watch the replay. I was making funny moves beside you.
Oh well, I missed that now. So someone's gonna have to
clip
Sorry,
it.
I was like, what the hell are you talking about? Delayed.
Delayed? I'm not delayed. I'm always on time. What is this?
Yes, a tasty arrives at precisely the time a tasty means to arrive.
It's because of his graphs.
Yes. Lens of skill.
Exactly. Lens of skill is lens 34 in the second edition, and the lens in first edition, it is Tasty? Hello?
Oh, in first edition, it's
lens number
7. 27.
27.
27.
We're all getting tired. This is taking too long. To use this lens.
Should go something.
To use this lens, stop looking at your game. He always says this. Stop looking at your game. Oh, I'm not looking at it now. It's a weird phrase. And start looking at the skills you're asking of your players. Ask yourself these questions. What skills does my game require from the player? Are the categories skill that is what are the categories of skill that this game are there categories of skill that this game is missing? I'm like, what the hell am I talking about? Which skills are dominant? Are the skills creating the experience I want? Are some players much better at these skills than others? Does this make the game feel unfair? Can players improve their skills with practice, leading to feeling of mastery? Does this game demand the right level of skill? Exercising skills can be a joyful thing. It is one of the reasons that people love games. Of course, it is only joyful if the skills are interesting and rewarding, and if the challenge level strikes the ideal balance between too easy and too hard, which the lens of challenge, I guess, we had earlier. When even dull skills such as pushing buttons can be made more interesting by dressing them up as virtual skills and providing the right level of challenge. Use this lens as a window into the experience the player is having, because the skills do so much to define experience. The lens of skill works quite well in conjunction with this lens too, the essential experience.
Yeah.
Skilly skills, so think about the skills. And
think about whether the skill is something the player should bring to the table, or is it something that the player develops inside of the game on their virtual character.
Yeah.
Because I mean that's kind of what defines RPGs. It's not very often you see RPG where the player is required to have physical skills. They're usually required to have mental skills, but not physical skills. But the physical aspect came in later with games like Diablo and other similar games where you're basically requiring the player to be able to react fast because it's not real time and it continuous time rather than a discrete time with turn-based.
I wonder what was the name? There was also an RPG, like an MMO RPG that was made in Korea some while ago. Something with T, which had
Terra?
Terra. Yeah,
Terra.
that has kind of, I guess, real skills you had to have. You had to
Yeah, it
actually
was
dodge manually, not
basically
just press a button to dodge.
exactly in the MMO world. We call these games
Crappy.
aim-based
Yeah.
targeting because you don't have like the fixed target system that you see in traditional MMOs where you press a button and it automatically targets the enemy and you automatically hit it. The funny part is though, this was actually in games a long time ago. Like you had a game, I forgot what it was called. Like it was in the time of Ultima Online and I forgot it. It was
I don't know
recently
what his
pulled
name is.
down. There was like a 1 and 2. Asheron's Call. That's the name of it. Asheron's Call. When that game came out, archers and spellcasters had to physically aim their spells, and you could dodge a spell. So that was a case of a time where RPGs, and we're talking about like the late 90s, talking about
Yeah.
a time where people had to aim in order to shoot, where most other games where they just required you to click a button and hit. But they went away from that in MMOs, and I guess it's because of lag and stuff.
Yeah.
Um,
Actually, I think this World of Warcraft kind of popularized the whole not having to aim also, on a whole different level where like a lot of people played Diablo and then were introduced to World of Warcraft.
yeah.
Whereas Diablo is also kind of aim based targeting. But yeah, I really like those games. It was just a joke, by the way, guys. They're freaking out in chat like, I love those games. Why did
Which games?
the aim based targeting type of
Oh,
I actually
yeah,
love
but
those.
I guess that in a way really says these types of players. And I think it also says a lot about the gaming industry. For the longest time, and I'm still kind of like that, we really, really were attracted to games that had a lot of virtual skill, but not a lot of physical or mental whatever skill. And that meant that a lot of the MMOs weren't really that challenging. So they didn't do that well on the flow charts.
No.
It was more like you play the game and it appeals to you on a social level because you have super awesome gear and no one else wanted to grind for 25 million hours. But games are more changing towards the dependency on personal skill. If you're really good at moving, then you will do better in a game like World of Warcraft to this day because the majority of the end game content now relies on you to move your character within a continuous space in order to avoid objects that fall down on your player or come up at your player or whatever.
Yeah, it becomes
And
basically more skill based as it goes on.
yeah, it becomes skill based on both your mental and your physical skill, and to some extent, it's a social skill playing in those. Because if you're like douchebaggy Bjorn 07, then no one's gonna want to have you in a raid because you constantly tell people they're idiots for not doing things the right way.
Exactly,
But
they're not because the
yeah,
probability and all these calculations you guys are doing are off. I done the math.
douchebaggy Bjorn.
Yeah, that's the only Bjorn that exists.
No, it's not.
So that
I'm here because of Nice Bjorn 01.
Oh, one. Oh.
The original Bjorn. Game dev love. So we've reached mechanic number 6, chance, which is I guess
number 7 for me.
7 in yours. Yeah.
So it says to cut it short, we should just say chance is very important and you should think about it. thank you everybody for joining today. No, I was kidding. No.
Does that mean I don't get to read the French quote?
Yes, you never got it in the first place. I will read it. No. Um,
Okay, well,
no,
maybe
no,
we
no.
should both read it, and then the viewers can vote
The
who
Battle
read
of
it
French.
who read it the worst way, as in the most entertaining way.
Well, I can read it in the worst way now. So the next
I think
part
you can.
is like 1/3 of the whole chapter, right? It almost
Yeah.
deserves its own chapter, and it's the mechanic of chance, which is very important. And Tasty can read. Will speak some French to you soon, but
Yes.
the whole idea is that a lot of the time, understanding chance and probability is not straightforward, especially if you're not a mathematician or studied a lot of probability math. And a lot of time, there's a huge difference between perceived chance, so things how you think chance works, like how it feels when you play it, versus how it actually is. And that a lot of time when the difference is too big is when people think the game is unfair. In quotes. But let's get started with some French quotations. Have you prepared your voice? Have you had a sip of water?
Yes, I think I will to the. And this quote is by a mathematician called Pascal. He says, Il est très bon esprit, mais quel dommage il n'est pas géomètre. And this means he is a nice guy, but unfortunately, no mathematician.
Yeah.
And the reason why this came up is because there's a big story in this book where we basically talk about the French nobleman Antoine Gobald, and he invented some sort of game in like 1650 where he would take 4 dice rolls on a 6-sided dice, and he would bet his friends that he wins if he gets at least 1 6. And basically this whole chapter is based off of how he doesn't know to calculate probability. And here's the tricky thing. Nobody did exactly at the time because they hadn't really designed these rules of probability, and that's what Pascal and some other mathematician did in the 1650s. So yeah.
Yeah. So basically, this Antoine Gambald, he was trying to, like Tasty said, like throw 4 dice, and then if one landed 6, he would win. Otherwise, the other one, and they would bet money, and he would thought that there would be a 66 chance of winning. But then what happened was, like, he won so much over time that his friends got bored of playing it. And then he thought, like, let's make another game that, is gonna seem more complex, but he thought that it would have the same chance of winning. Where, let me get the dice rolls right. Where is it? It's in.
He says he starts by doing the 4 dices. If one of them is a 6, then he believes he has a 66% chance of winning.
Yeah.
But then his friends didn't want to play it anymore. And in reality, it's not 66% chance of.
No.
If you use the probability math, then it's 51 point something percent chance of winning, which is why he would win often, and his friends didn't like it. And then his new game was 24 dice, and
24 dice. Yeah.
he said that his chances of getting 12 like double 6s, 12 pairs. He felt that when if I do the math, then he's 66 because 4 dice, 1 6, that would be the same as 24 dice, 2 6s, but it's really not. The odds are more like 17 or something like that.
Yeah, so the whole idea is that knowing how to calculate chance. So in the book, he goes through, is it how many rules he has here?
7, 8 rules,
8 rules.
9,
Yeah.
10 rules.
10. Yeah, 10 it says here. So the thing is that, for example, you could even say like so depending on how you calculate chance. So if you why does, for example, role playing games use, for example, in my overlay, the Bit Castle game, when you throw a rock, launch a rocket, I have a damage of 8 plus 2d6. That Why don't I make it, for example, 10, just random range 10 to 22? It would be the same range of damage, but actually, because I do 2d6, the average damage will be more likely to be around 15 versus either lower or higher, because I'm throwing 2 dice. So this is thing that, learning about chance. So we're not going to go through all these rules, or do you want to? It's going to take
No, I don't think we should. But I think we should cover the thing where you said, 2 dice is going to make an average. For someone who understands math, which I don't really that well, then it makes sense when you say it like that. The reason why throwing 2 dice is going to give a higher number on average than doing the random thing from 1 to, let's say you're throwing, what did you say, 2d8? Was that it?
2d6. 2d6.
2d6. So
It's the
that
same
will
one in the
generate a
book.
result between 2 and 12,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. The thing is, though, when you're doing it like that, you basically have the lower end number, like the way that you combine the numbers is going to give you a chance of getting 7.
Yeah.
I mean, that would be like there's the highest chances, like, I don't know, like 16 or 15% chance of getting a 7 when you throw 2d6, whereas your chances of getting a 12 or a 2 is in the 2% range or something like that. So, knowing this math is really, really important as a game developer if you are using elements of chance in your game. And you knew it, and that's why you did it like that, because you wanted a higher average, whereas someone else might have done it different. Spectrum says, is that why we have chance RPG attributes in increase the chance with criticals or NPC? I think I need that question rephrased. I don't quite understand it. Maybe you do.
So the idea is, like, again, like you saw this diagram, right, that I showed on stream.
Yeah.
So there you can see there's only 1 2, and there's only 1 12. There's 2 11s and 2 3s, 3 4s, and 3 10s. So this is all the results you could get.
I can show it a bit more visual.
So this is the visual, like how big of a chance. So there's about, what is that? Above 16%, I think it says there. So you can see how many 7s in my diagrams. That's why there's more likely to get 7s, because more things sum to 7. And that changes, of course, depending on the number of dice and how big dice you use. But this kind of distribution of of what you can get if you use the sums is very important to understand, so you can use it. Again, linear is not always what you want. You don't want linear always. For example, another way, which is not covered with the book, it's a very interesting. Actually, the book has a really good reference here. You could use a machination system created by Joris Dormans, which kind of shows, and you can play around with these kind of things and learn about what are the chances and odds and probability. And, it's very interesting. If you take a dice and you start recording, you throw the dice 100 times, most people will think you will get a very straight line, like visually. Like the amount of 1s would be the same as num 2s, 3s, 4, 5, and 6. But in the truth, it would be very jagged. And then 1 would probably stick up, like, oh, you got a lot more 6s. And then when you throw 100 more, maybe it evens out. And then you throw 100 more, and then it goes again a bit on skew in some other number. And that's what usually happens, this kind of pattern, slight pattern, that some number just by chance gets more. And these are things that you can actually also abuse in games if you know how they work. So for example, Jesse was making a game where there was dropping things. So for example, another way to get perfectly aligned things is use a deck of cards, right? there's only one of each in this deck of cards. If I get it, I take it out. That means that it can only get, like, if I now would pull 52 cards up here, they would only have appeared once. If I put it back in the deck, then it can come again, which means there's the same odd, and it can come several times if I pull several times. But if I remove it, it's gonna have even. So if I pull 100 times, each card would probably have very even. Like, you will get everything 2 times, and in the end, and that's because it changes the chance every time. You're more likely to get, so if that card, and that's how they count cards in, for example, blackjack, because you know that every time a card is pulled out and given to you, is removed from the deck and it can't come again.
Yeah.
So
and that allows you to calculate the probability. Like if you have a full deck of cards and Bjorn says, what are my odds? Like what are my chances of pulling out this specific card from the deck of 52? Then that would be one card divided by 52 cards, which is something like 0.01 or something. So that would be like about 1% or something like that, isn't it? I don't know. I didn't do the math. Am I right?
Yeah, it doesn't matter. It's about something. I don't know. We can use a calculator to calculate it.
Let's do that. Yeah, so it's 0.19. So it's almost 2% chance. You could have done that. I kind of tried to do it in my head, but I was thrown off. Let's say we take out 2 cards from the deck, then it's 2% chance of getting the right card. If there were 25 cards and you needed to get 1 right, then it would be 4% chance. So basically what this chapter really goes into depth is like how to use this probability calculation to make smart decisions about introducing chance to your game.
Yeah.
And what you were talking about now was like rule number 9, the practical probability, which kind of diverts from the theoretical probability, because in theory, if you roll a dice, there's a 16.67% chance that you roll it, but you could roll 2 6s in a row. That wouldn't mean that you have a chance to roll 6s just because it happened 2 times in a row. But people still use this Monte Carlo casino style way of determining how are things sometimes happening rather than just the percentage of.
Yeah, and that's the whole thing, that learning probability math as a game designer is super useful. He tries to teach you the basics here. I actually dislike how he teaches. I find I know probability math quite well, but for me, how he explains it becomes a bit confusing, because he uses a lot of like verbal, like, it's basically not really teaching the math versus teaching how to deconstruct a sentence almost. I don't know if you agree, but it becomes
I agree with you,
follow.
but I'm on the other fence here because I never really paid attention in math, so I haven't learned probability math, and I feel that this book does a really good job for me of explaining certain parts of it. But since you are in some ways, or in many ways probably, a mathematician and I'm not, that's where the book becomes more useful for me, because it goes into semantics, which are really necessary to understand this thing, because sometimes you need to enumerate, like you need to make a list in order to figure out how does this thing work. But sometimes the number of combinations are so many that you cannot enumerate. You cannot sit and write a list of, what are the chances of rolling 1d6? What are the chances of rolling a 6 if I roll 70 times? You can't sit there and do 70 times no dice, 69 times and 1 6er, or 68 times and then 2 6ers. You can't sit and write all that down, so you need to do the math sometimes as well.
Yeah,
Um,
I think that the why I dislike it is not necessarily. I love that he uses a story, by the way, to teach
yeah,
it. That's really good. But because it's a book, it's maybe the hardest part. That if this was interactive, it would be so much easier to explain. Like if you looked at there's a web game that teaches a bit about it's like what type of kind of attitude um, using probability and or actually mechanics tries to teach how people kind of like if you're how you treat other people, how does that affect, like if you have people who, like in a game you have 12 people and then let's say 6 of them would always be, cheating, and 6 of them would be always like forgiving, who would win, like
mm,
what type of player would win in certain scenarios. I don't remember what that game was, but that's very visual. It sounds very complex when I talk about it, but because I don't remember exactly the name of that anymore. But the same thing applies to this. That this visually represented and telling the story would have been easier, like as a video even, because a lot of time these lists don't. They do explain, but they become a bit boring to read. So I think a lot of people skip it. Um, but showing it in a video would be interesting if someone made a video out of this. Maybe they did. I would say that that would be much more, even if I didn't know this, like, or I think it would be more, it would be easier to understand.
yeah. Out of the examples that he is giving, are there any that you would like to like bring out?
Well, the one thing I want to really is that no matter what the probability is in real math, then there is the whole kind of what you think, kind of like the human element, he calls it. And I think that
Yeah,
is for me the most interesting thing because
the perceived chance.
exactly, like if you play, he uses this example, game A, you have a 66% chance of winning $2,400. You have a 33% chance of winning $2,500. Then you have 1% chance, so 1% of winning nothing, so $0. And then you have game B where you have 100% chance of winning $2,400. So you get to choose which game you play, and people will play game B, uh, even if if you calculate mathematically, you're more likely to earn more money with game A. But because you have a chance of getting nothing, people will still rather take the sure bet, with insurance, which is game B.
Mm, yeah,
Is loot
they want to
programmed with
buy a
chance?
peace
Yeah,
of mind.
yeah. Loot is chance, but they different games use different types of chance. So chance is probability. It's like what is the drop rate? Could be one, and can be calculated different ways, and how programmed different ways. You could use a stack. You could use like a card stack. You could use just linear randomization. You could use weighted values. You could use a lot of different things. And
You can also use this kind of math to determine whether or not things are balanced. Like, let's say you have a dungeon, there are these amount of mobs. With each mob has a specific chance to drop specific things. You kind of calculate out the value of that. So, in technical terms, every one of your mobs in your dungeon game has an average gold value. If you put 20 of these mobs in the dungeon, 7 of these other mobs, then your dungeon will have an average gold value of combined if you clear all of it, and that gives you a way to compare one dungeon to the other as a game designer. These are not values that your players necessarily would be able to see, but you could, as a game designer, take it and say, okay, well, if I place so and so many mobs in my dungeon, then the dungeon's combined difficulty rating would be something like this. I'm not taking into account that 1 million small mobs are going to be easy to kill with one AOE. Um, that would require a whole lot of other math, but I'm just saying, like, you can use these things to figure out if something is balanced versus something else, and that's where the perceive sorry the value of something comes up.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. There's Excel again for doing these type of games or any game. Excel is your friend. Learn Excel, learn a bit of probability math. Um, it would be
yeah,
cool to go through the story and really discuss it, but it's just so
yeah. There's
much.
no
It's like a
time.
whole 3 hour session probably to do that. And then we
Yeah,
probably should, like I said, it would be really good to have like visualizations and like animations and things that show.
yeah. But I'm just gonna say really fast when you mention Excel and spreadsheets. Use it. Use it to simulate stuff. Use the power of the computer. You have a mob. This mob has a chance to drop, let's say, 1 to 5 gold or something like that. And then it has a chance to drop a diamond, which is worth something else. Put it in Excel, press the button, simulate it 1 million times, and then see what is the average amount of gold it gets. And in 1 million kills, how many times did the player get the diamond or the sapphire or whatever? Just there are reasons why people use these simulations and theory crafting. They don't base their judgment on, holy crap, we have
Holy
sub.
crap!
I'll be quiet.
A $10 sub? Holy crap! Welcome. Thank you for supporting what we do. Um, is it gonna do? There's no message. Thank you, dude. Thank you for supporting us. Some hype in chat. Tasty, start the hype. For Spectrum, enjoy the Love Game Dev emote. Remember, guys, when you sub, remember to connect your Twitch to your Discord so you get access to the sub only chat where we discuss weird things clearly. And also remember, as a sub, you get priority feedback at Tuesday's show. You help me, I help you.
Which is
Exactly.
super awesome. Tuesday's show is like it's like this but better.
Well, thank
I
you.
want to bring up something really fast. It's on the section that says consider values carefully, and it basically talks about 3 attacks in a fantasy game. You have a wind attack that has a 100% chance of hitting but deals 4 damage. Then you have a fireball that has an 80% chance of hitting but deals 5 damage. And then you have a lightning bolt which has a 20% chance of hitting but deals 40 damage. Um, and this is a case where you really have to think about these values, because the the expected value of this fireball thing is, I think it's 8 points or something. Like, there's a 20% chance of missing, so 40 times 20% is 8-ish, something like that,
Yep,
isn't it? Yeah.
I think so.
But
Yeah.
let's say you're fighting an enemy that has 20 health. Then it's not really the optimal choice to go with a spell that has a 20% chance to miss and then one-shots the enemy and then overkills it by 20 points. And that's kind of where, other things have a higher value. And these are the things that you, as a game designer, you really need to test these things out. Figure out, what is the average damage of this attack? Because I've seen a lot of game developers, and I'm to blame for doing this as well, because I do this too. Like, I'll put down a percentage and I'll be like 50% chance of hitting and it deals 30 damage or something, and then I'll 75% and it deals some other number. It's like, if you do the math, you'll be able to kind of figure out what are the expected values for these, and are they useful? Do I need to tweak them up or down? You still need metrics. You still need to see players test them, and you need to run through simulators to find out if these things are really that good or not. But yeah, I just thought that was really interesting because it's something I see a lot of people do.
Yeah. So
Um,
calculating, and that's the thing. There's so many factors, like the max health. Then the damage is capped at the max health, so that means the average goes down. Then
yeah,
it's a 4 damage hit with a, like 4. Let's say he has 8 health, then the 8 is the maximum damage you can deal.
yeah,
It's a simple way to put it. So
exactly.
so that becomes let's go to then the next lens, which is lens 35, the lens of expected value. To use this
Yep.
lens, think about the chance of different events occurring in your game, and what does those mean to your player. Ask yourself these questions. What is the actual chance of a certain event occurring? What is the perceived chance? What values does the outcome of that event have? Can the value be quantified? Are there intangible aspects of value that I'm not considering? Each action a player can take has different expected value when I add up all the possible outcomes. Am I happy with these values? Do they give the player interesting choices? Are they too rewarding or too punishing? Expected value is one of your most valuable tools for analyzing game balance. The challenge of using it is finding a way to numerically represent everything that can happen to a player. Gaining and losing money is easy to represent, but what is the numerical value of boots of speed that let you run faster, or warp gate to let you skip 2 levels? Those are difficult to quantify perfectly, but that doesn't mean that you can't take a guess. As well, as we'll see in the next chapter, as you go through multiple iterations of game testing and tweaking, parameters and values in your game, you will also be tweaking your own estimations of values of different outcomes. Quantifying these less tangible elements can be quite enlightening because it makes you think concretely about what is valuable to the player and why. And this concrete knowledge will put you in control of the balance of your game.
Yes, Sensei.
I want a Game Dev Company cup. Ooh, that would be awesome. We did
Yeah,
think
we are
about,
working on it.
yeah, we're working on something with Tasty, but it's slow progress. Slow.
Yeah.
Slow.
There are a lot of things that need to be set in place first, like the overlay game need to be finished, and you have a lot of things that need focus before doing t-shirts and stuff.
Yeah. But it's definitely something I'm looking into, and mugs, and like it would be nice to have um, all the designs and stuff available in different. Like you can get a T-shirt, you can get a mug, whatever you want.
Yeah, but that's gonna happen with Spreadshirt. Like you just take a check mark, and then basically whatever product they have on the website, you can put your logo or stuff on.
Exactly. I already set that up, but it still will. We want to create some cool designs. That's the thing, and that
Yeah,
takes time.
and feedback from you guys.
What feedback? No, I'm
Yeah,
too scared. What if he doesn't like it? What if they're not constructive?
they probably aren't. I mean, have you read the chat?
They're destructive.
See, there's one. Spectrum says T-shirt that says, "I survived the last book club with Game Dev Company and Tasty Craft.
I am a survivor.
I joined book club and all I got was a lousy T-shirt, and I had to pay for it too."
Exactly. And I still don't know how to design games. God.
Yeah, I didn't learn anything. God.
God. Anyway,
Yeah.
and then
Um.
I guess the chapter ends with one last lens, but before that, he discusses how skill and chance get entangled. You have
Yeah.
that?
Yep.
Estimating chance is a skill. So, of course, that's something you can also play in games like Blackjack. They try to estimate the chance of stuff happening. That's actually
Yeah.
gameplay.
Yeah, that is the skill of being able to like figure out what card can come next or what are the odds of the next card coming out. That is that's a calculating thing. You can calculate the probability. And that is a skill that some people have, a real skill.
Yep, and then we have skills have a probability of success. You didn't just say that one, right? I read chat.
I didn't.
So that's basically like even if something is fully skill based, it still has a probability of succeeding. Um, it's not, of course, it varies, but he uses, for example, baseball and things like that as example, or chess. So he says, one might think that complete skill-based games such as chess or baseball have no aspects of randomness or risk in them, but from a player's point of view, this simply isn't true. So there's always a chance and risk, even if in the end it is a skill-based thing, which is important to know. I don't know if you want to say anything more. There's not really. It's
No,
about
I mean, like moving on to number thing about estimating an opponent's skill. That is a skill.
yep. So
Yeah.
being able to measure them up. That's always in anime. I don't know why I'm going to this, but they're always like, oh, I
Animu.
you don't know how good I am, and then they fight and they're like, oh, he's so much better because they don't have the skill to estimate. But then when they level up, suddenly they can see like, oh my god, now finally I'm at the skill level where I can estimate his skill level even at the fraction, and then you're like, oh, he's so
And then
powerful.
and then the opponent accidentally makes the remark that I can do this for a week, and then One Punch Man. Week? That means it's Saturday. It's shopping day. And then he just one punches the enemy. Game over. Sorry for spoiling.
Yeah, that was the whole. That's how the anime ends. Oh, I mean, no, that's not how it ends. That's
Yeah,
also an anime.
but being able to
Anime.
estimate your opponent's skill is a skill in itself, and it's like, for instance, for a coach, it is an extremely important skill for a coach to have, because he needs to understand the skill and the capacity of players. But the better he is at analyzing the opponent's team, and the better he is at analyzing them, you know, the easier it is for him to be a coach. So that is one place where this could be. But it's also a case of, like, if you're playing a shooter game, you need to, I mean, you're taking some risk in, like, is he going to go left or is he going to go right if I use this feint or whatever? And estimating your opponent's skill level is important, because if you know that this guy is a total noob, then he's probably going to tricks. If you know that he's not, if he's super, super experienced, then, the old hide behind a door is probably not going to work, because the way that these pro players play is, they can negate that kind of trick. And then we have number 4, which is predicting pure chance is an imagined skill.
Except for
And
me.
except for Bjorn, who is able to predict pure chance. I'm
Actually,
not really
there is
sure
an
how to.
interesting. There's actually an interesting thing about this predicting pure chance and imagined skill,
Yeah,
whereas a lot of security, around the world is based on this theory that you can't guess something that's random. But the thing with computers, nothing is random again, so
yeah,
you can actually predict it, and that's where actually a lot of security protocols have been hacked because you can actually predict them because they're again not real chance. But
yeah.
yes, anyway, that has nothing to do with the book or anything. It is
No,
just
but it's like where it says here, predicting pure chance is an imagined skill. It's like there are people who will say stuff like, I've lost 5 times in a row, so I'm gonna win the next one, if we're talking like pure chance.
yeah,
Um, and this is something that has to do with perceived chance as well. Like, players will feel that the chances are higher, and as a game designer, sometimes maybe you should, you know, and you see that happening in games where the game designers implement these sort of safety nets. It's like, you summon this thing, and if it's crap, then too bad for you. It could have been really awesome. If you summon crap 10 times in a row, the game might have a higher chance of summoning something better for. So I'm seeing a lot more games going in and kind of upping the chances of pure chance, which basically takes it from being pure RNG to, in a way, procedural.
yeah,
Wouldn't you agree?
yeah, exactly.
If there's like a rule that says, if you've lost 25,000 times, then you are guaranteed a super awesome thing.
Yeah, it's the whole kind of thing with chance is like sometimes you definitely don't want sometimes it to feel like chance, and sometimes you want to break chance to make it move forward because you're in the end creating an experience, not a mathematical machine, right? It's also a mathematical machine, but the idea is to make the mathematical machine's purpose is to make fun, right? To make
Mhm.
interesting and gameplay, and then that's why sometimes, like you say, like saying like if you try it 25,000 times, then after that you get it for free, no matter if you get it or not.
Yeah.
Like it might be a better system for the game, and that's then you need to do that. Like for example, in World of Warcraft, I was farming I don't know how many days for some certain drop, and well, it was kind of rewarding, but also at the same time, because I had to do things like that, I stopped playing the game because I don't have 2 days anymore
Mm.
to farm for things. So, not saying they should implement where you have a guaranteed drop rate of something, but like that it would drop after a certain amount of time in the area, because that would be. But it's still something depending
I
on the
think
type
they
of game you
should,
do.
and they probably did too in some cases.
Yeah, maybe. Sup, everyone?
I'm
Welcome.
pretty sure they did. Metathias says that's called gambler's fallacy, and that was a reference to where I said this thing about I've had several losses, so I'm going to win soon. You know, that's the
Yeah.
gambler's fallacy.
Yeah. Exactly.
But as the book goes on to say, it says it's easy to scoff at these as ignorant, but in the all-important mind of the player, detecting these bogus patterns feels like the exercise of a real skill. And as a designer, you should find ways to use that to your advantage. Um, and that's kind of where this thing where I said, you know, if someone loses 5 times in a row, then give them a victory. That will make them feel like they've spotted sort of a pattern, you know. Um, and that's sort of the thing where you can reward the player for spotting something which isn't there, but you can enforce it to be there. So if you lose X amount of times, give them a goodie, and they'll be like, you know, I've lost, blah blah blah, and they'll be rewarded for spotting these patterns.
The original had a truly random piece every time, which was a major nuisance into that game. Yeah, I mean that's the thing. It's like just mentioned that you should sometimes play to this towards this because it creates. So the next one is controlling pure chance is an imagined skill. So controlling pure chance. The previous was predicting. So here, for example, people create this kind of like um, superstitious rituals that like if I rub this my hands together 5 times, then I touch my right side of my face, and then I throw the dice, then I'm more likely to get something. But that's still something, just like the previous. You want to play towards the strengths of like that these people create these rituals, so you can actually make it a game, part of the game, to have these rituals and make it fun. And that's again, you're making an experience, not a math machine. So you can actually, well, if it's a gambling game, then you should probably consider, then you need to get the probability right. But if it's not a gambling game or anything like that, then like here, controlling pure chance, you really want to be feeding these kind of behaviors, maybe even because that might create interesting culture or things around your game.
Yeah, I play a game on mobile called Summoner's War where um, you have specific type of scrolls that have a higher chance of summoning really good monsters. And what players will do is they will farm up as many of these scrolls as possible, um, because it feels to them like if you summon 10 scrolls in a row, then the odds of you getting a good monster in those 10 scrolls is higher than if you do one at a time every time you get a scroll, which is really interesting. Obviously, there's no sort of logic at all to that. There isn't. I mean, I've tried summoning 70 scrolls in a row and got like 2 good monsters. I've also tried summoning 3 scrolls in a row and gotten 3 good monsters. So obviously my metrics aren't enough to say this is how it is or this is how it isn't, but people have come to have these sort of rituals when they're summoning. Like some people say, I need to have X amount or I won't summon. And other people are like, I need to go to the toilet and summon on the toilet because once I sat there and I got the best monster in the game when I pooped and summoned. You know, there are really people like that who say these things. So it's interesting to see how people think they can control pure chance, and it's an imagined skill. They feel like somehow sitting there and saying, please, summon good monster, summon good monster, summon good monster is going to make a difference. It's not, but it's interesting that people perceive this as a skill.
Well, that's the thing that summon more monsters. You're also kind of psyching you up, right? You're kind of
Mm.
creating positive feelings, and you attach those positive feelings with the game. So, for example, Hearthstone, when you open those packs, where
Yeah.
people are like, oh, look at it, maybe the glimmer is a bit different in this one, and you're like, oh, maybe this one will be the one with a whatever card, and then you open it and it's not. So that it's kind of a game in itself. These rituals.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, Meta is saying Tetris, so they introduce bads with a random order of 4 of each type and then pull them out of a bag. So yeah, that's basically just using a stack of cards, right? So you have 4 and then you put them in the bag and then you pull them out. Once you pull it out, you remove it. So you have a set so you can know again, you can feed into the thing that estimating chance is a skill. So once you can keep track of that, you can actually create a game where people are playing it because they can estimate the chance, and that's fun for them, like in blackjack.
Yeah.
Well, blackjack they do it because they can earn money, but but yeah, we have the last lens, and then after that, I think that's it. So the last
It
lens is lens 36, the lens of chance. To use this lens, focus on the parts of your game that involve randomness and risk. Keep in mind that those two things are not the same. Ask yourself these questions. What in my game is truly random? What parts just feel random? Do the randomness give the player positive feelings of excitement and challenge, or does it give them negative feelings of hopelessness and lack of control? Would changing my probability distribution curves improve my game? Do the players have the opportunity to take interesting risks in the game? What is the relationship between chance and skill in my game? Are there ways I can make random elements feel more like exercise of a skill? Are there ways I can make exercising skills feel more like risk taking? Risk and randomness are like spices. A game without any hint of them can be completely bland, but put in too much and they overwhelm everything else. But get them just right and they bring out the flavor of everything else in your game. Unfortunately, using them in your game is not as simple as sprinkling them on top. You must look into your game and see where the elements of risk and randomness naturally arise, and then decide how you can best tame them to do your bidding. Don't fall into the trap of thinking that elements of chance only occur around die rolls or randomly generated numbers. On contrary, you can find them wherever a player encounters the unknown.
Dum dum dum.
That I think it would art drawing. Yeah. Well, I still have to continue the last stream's thing, but I will probably draw for a moment and then end it earlier, and then
Yeah, it's gonna be a short one.
Yeah. But that's the whole thing about the players, the game mechanic chapter. So explaining game mechanics. The thing, like I said in the beginning, I kind of like all these things he described are relevant, and they're all, I think, correct. Like they're relevant things, and he knows what he's talking about. The only thing that I kind of find is that it's hard to say that all of these parts are part of the game mechanic. So, and that's a kind of interesting discussion topic, which is kind of, again, more scientific. Like we already said many times, almost everybody has their own definition of game mechanics. Even if I and me and Tasty have read the same book, you might be like, I might point out something in game, like this game mechanic is blah blah, and then he's like, that's not a game mechanic, and then he's like, well, is it? And then you go into a discussion. And in the end, it doesn't matter how you define what a game mechanic is, as long as you have in common language, like we started this whole stream. So helping you communicate with others, and also that's a really useful skill, is that you understand many definitions of game mechanics and you discuss them through before you start designing a game together. So instead of forcing your opinion necessarily. You can also adjust your point of view, like, oh, we're going to use game mechanic in this way with this project, or in this company, or in this team. But yeah, I would say that this is some things I feel a bit weird to think as part of a game mechanic. Like all of these are elements that definitely, like for example, there's some who define game mechanic is what in Jesse's book is called actions. So the
Or
verb,
verbs.
yeah, verbs. So what can the player do, and that is what a game mechanic is. There's several people who define it that way. So, for example, then an element in the game, which he has here, like an object, is not a game mechanic, but it's something the game mechanics interact with. So when you do something with them, they interact with them. So that would be another definitions, which I've used more in the past. But I don't think this is wrong, because it is interesting. Like, if you remove the objects, the game mechanics can't really work. So they are integral in that way. And
Yeah,
you know,
I think it's a good idea to use the terms the way that he does in the, whereas a mechanic is an action. A mechanic is an object which has attributes and states in the game. The space is a form of mechanic. I think that's a good way to describe things, because we have a tendency to use mechanic to describe how things relate to each other. Like we'll say, well, I really like that mechanic where when you click the button in the map, then the world flips upside down. And in reality,
there's only a 30% chance of that happening.
okay, well,
Just kidding.
In reality, it's like, you know, that is a mechanic, but it's a mechanic because of flipping the continuous space that the players are in, if you know what I mean. So it's like this, you need to have the mechanic of a play space in order to make the mechanic work, like a button that reverses the gravity. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah, exactly. And that's why I don't think it's necessarily wrong to say that these are the parts of the mechanic. But then again, I don't think it's either wrong to say that mechanics are the things that players do,
Yeah.
and then to say that they interact with within the space. Like, you still need a space and environment. You need time. You need to think about this. So, like I said, everything we learn, no matter what you define as a mechanic, all the things in this chapter is relevant, and is something you do, no matter how you define it, need to take in consideration. And the math and the psychology behind these are relevant no matter what. And I think this is just good to point out, because I do know that there are people with stronger views who are like, no, this is all wrong, and it destroys my world picture. And that's fine, but I think really thinking in it with an open mind, and also being able to digest different point of views, definitely help you as a game designer. I don't know, did they in Level Up define what is a game mechanic? I think so. We'll see.
I can't remember now. I'm pretty sure it does. I mean, most books tend to try to define it. Most books on game design.
You guys are really cramping my MO.
What does that mean?
MO, what is it short for? It's
modus operandi, but
yeah. I don't know why. I don't know what his modus operandi is.
Yeah, but I mean, what does it mean that we're cramping here? Sorry, English not my first language.
Way of thinking.
Oh, we're changing your way of thinking?
Yeah, we shouldn't.
I thought that was a good thing. I thought that was a good thing.
No, it's not.
We are spreading the gospel of Jesse Shell. We have learned many things from book. Now we spread knowledge to you.
And the interesting thing will be when we go spread the gospels of every other book, and that's when the interesting part comes in, when we've read like 2-3 books, and then we have a discussion about things, and it's like, in the book number 4 it said this, and in book number 2 it said this. Which one is right? And they can both be right. in their own way, or maybe the truth lies somewhere in between.
I think usually the truth is always somewhere in between because, like, our perception of the world is really our own. It's
Um,
just,
Your
no.
perception is mine. I own it. No.
Okay, well, my perception is Bjorn's perception.
Yeah. So discussion ended. This is how Tasty sees it. Pay to win.
Yeah.
No.
Myr is a Danish singer. Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah, she is.
So anyway, no, but you're right. It is always games are experiences, so that's why this subjective point of views do matter, but not when it comes to chance. They do matter from experience, but there is also the real chance. So if you're making a gambling game or if something with a lot of drop rates, it's good to know your probability math. So go read up on that.
Yeah.
There's probably good videos on like Khan Academy. I should go look.
Metathias says, I dual wield the credit card.
What?
That's always the best class in any game. Well, I guess if it's a pay-to-win game.
So, should we do 2 chapters again? They're a bit longer, but I feel like if we do 1 chapter all the time, we're just gonna fall behind.
We can do 2 chapters. I noticed that my next one, chapter 11, that's about pages.
What?
And then
About
with a
pages?
lot of lenses. That's about 30 pages.
Yeah. Well, it's called a game mechanics must be in balance, right?
Yeah.
This is about balancing.
Yep. It's got
It is
a
a bit
lot.
heavy.
And then we've got game mechanics support puzzles in chapter 12. And that's actually not that long.
Yeah, that's
I
why
think
I
it's
was
a good.
thinking.
Let's do 2 chapters. That's fine. That's like about 50 pages for next week. That should be
Yeah.
fine.
It's a bit longer, but I think because the last chapter is a bit shorter, that it should be fine. Like you
Yeah.
said. So
All right,
we'll
that's
be
a deal.
back.
2 chapters.
So read 2
So,
chapters, guys. We will be back next Sunday with more games at book club.
Stream is not ending yet, is it?
No. I'm still gonna draw
You're
some.
you're just throwing me out now.
Yeah, I'm throwing you out on the field. So we're
Yes.
gonna continue with the art of game design with Tasty Graph and Bjorn, not Bjork, which is a Danish. No, she's not Danish. Is she Danish? No.
No, she's not Danish. Björk is from, I think, Iceland.
Oh. Okay. Free night.
Which is not the same.
Exactly. So we will continue. If you haven't gotten the book, you can still get it. There's VODs. I made them available today up till to this episode 5. So today was episode 6. Tasty has edition, first edition. I have second edition, so you're covered no matter which one you get. Listen to Bjork. No, I never listened to Bjork. So, Tasty, thanks for joining. Sorry for it going this much overtime. I didn't think it would take this much time. I don't know why it took so much. I need to watch the VOD and analyze it.
I think it's because I talk a lot, and then you talk a lot, and then we go totally over. But it was a very, very, very thick chapter in terms of knowledge.
Exactly.
But thank you for having me, and I look forward to next week. We'll be talking about balancing and puzzles.
Yeah, so if you want your game in balance, join us next week.
Yep. Okay, I'm gonna find the leave button.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Yep. See you, dude.
Yep. Thanks for having me. See you, everyone, and feel free to send me a follow on Twitter. My name is down there in the corner, or you could do it on here as well.
Exactly.
Sometimes I stream and say smart stuff, but usually only when Bjorn is around. So I'm out. Bye-bye. I'll see you in chat.
See you, dude. Yeah, guys, go follow Tasty if you haven't already. He's